Welcome to Diversifying and Greening Humanitarian Supply Chain Workshop at Hall D2 J Expo Kemayoran. To participants who have completed registration, please enter the seminar room and take your assigned seats. Thank you.
Hadirin sekalian, selamat datang di Jakarta International Expo. Terima kasih telah memilih kami sebagai venue event Anda. Sebelum Anda menikmati acara, mohon perhatiannya terhadap pengumuman keselamatan ini. Keselamatan Anda adalah prioritas utama kami. Adalah kewajiban kami untuk menyampaikan petunjuk-petunjuk keselamatan, terutama jika terjadi keadaan darurat, seperti kebakaran, gempa bumi, terjebak di lift, dan listrik padam. Bangunan ini dilengkapi dengan alat pemadam kebakaran, alat pendeteksi kebakaran, sistem alarm kebakaran, pengeras suara untuk pengumuman, dan pintu keluar darurat untuk evakuasi. Silakan luangkan waktu untuk menemukan pintu keluar darurat dan jalur evakuasi terdekat Anda. Terdapat 3 titik kumpul, 1 berada di area depan bangunan ini, dan 2 lainnya berada di area parkir timur dan barat. Jika Anda mendengar alarm kebakaran terus-menerus, harap tetap tenang dan jangan panik. Dengarkan pengumuman dari pengeras suara atau ikuti instruksi petugas penanganan keadaan darurat di gedung Anda. Selama evakuasi, selalu ikuti petunjuk petugas yang memandu Anda dan perhatikan beberapa hal berikut ini. Segeralah menuju pintu keluar terdekat dan jangan berlari. Silakan menuju titik kumpul dengan tertib. Jika Anda berada di lantai 2, segera turun ke lantai dasar melalui tangga. Bantu penyandang disabilitas dan ibu hamil. Jangan membawa beban berat. Lepas sepatu berhak tinggi. Tetap tenang selama berada di titik kumpul. Dan jangan kembali masuk ke dalam gedung kecuali petugas kami menyatakan aman untuk melakukannya. Jika terjadi gempa, lakukan hal berikut ini. Jangan panik dan lindungi kepala Anda dengan tangan atau benda. Cari tempat berlindung yang kokoh berdasarkan prinsip segitiga kehidupan. Setelah gempa reda, segera keluar dari gedung dengan dipandu oleh petugas penanganan keadaan darurat. Jika Anda mengalami terjebak di lift, lakukan hal berikut ini. Jangan panik. Jangan membuka paksa pintu lift. Tekan tombol darurat. Bicara dengan operator lift atau security. Tetaplah tenang sampai bantuan datang. Jika listrik tiba-tiba padam, tetap tenang dan jangan panik. Listrik akan menyala beberapa saat kemudian dengan bantuan generator. Beberapa hal yang dilarang selama beraktivitas di gedung ini. Dilarang merokok, kecuali di tempat yang disediakan di luar gedung. Dilarang memindahkan peralatan penanggulangan keadaan darurat tanpa berkoordinasi dengan petugas safety and security. Dilarang membuang sampah di sembarang tempat. Demikian petunjuk keselamatan ini. Demi keselamatan kunjungan Anda, patuhilah peraturan tersebut dan nikmatilah kunjungan Anda di Jakarta International Expo.
Good morning, everyone. If you have completed your registration, could you please take your seat? We will begin shortly. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. We'd like to inform you that the event will begin soon, so please take your seat. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. We will be beginning our event shortly, so please take your seats. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Selamat pagi, Bapak Ibu sekalian. Welcome to the USAID workshop, Diversifying and Greening Humanitarian Supply Chain, in conjunction with the Disaster Management and Civil Protection Expo and Conference, and Global Forum for Sustainable Resilience 2024. My name is Sarah Sullivan, and I'll be your MC for today. Before we begin, I'd like to inform you all that there are translation devices near that entrance over there. So if you would like to have a device in case you need help with Bahasa or English, since this event will include both, Channel 1 will be in Bahasa Indonesia and Channel 5 will be in English. I would like to thank USAID and BNPB for hosting today's event. and thank everybody for attending. Before we begin, I'd like to give a quick rundown of today's agenda. From 10:30 until 10:45, we will have opening remarks from Dr. Aditya Jati, the BNPB Deputy Minister for Systems and Strategy, and Erin Nicholson, the USAID Indonesia Deputy Mission Director. From 10:45 until 12 o'clock, we will have a session on global efforts and progress on greening humanitarian supplies with guest speakers Pablo Torres from USAID, Ikbal Alexander from USAID EXA, John Zavales, also from USAID, and from 12 o'clock until 1:30, we will have a break for lunch and Friday prayers. When we come back at 1:30 until 3 o'clock, we will have our session on private sector landscape assessment and specification with guest speakers Richard Recker from Resonance, Pablo Torres from USAID, and Pak Wahyu Widayanto from IFRC. After that, we will take a short coffee break. And when we return, we will continue with our e-marketplace session with Dr. Robert De Souza. Is the Deputy Minister for Systems and Strategy at BNPB, which is Indonesia's National Disaster Management Agency. Dr. Jati has been a senior official at BNPB since 2014. Prior to joining BNPB, Dr. Jati mostly worked in academics and research with prominent institutions and has contributed to numerous publications, including the annually released Disaster Risk Index of Indonesia. Please welcome Dr. Aditya Jati.
Ms. Erin Nicholson, Deputy Mission Director, USAID, welcome. A very good morning. Distinguished guests, panelists, and also all the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, everyone. It's a truly honor to be here with you today that the event on diversifying and greening humanitarian supply chains workshop, and I'm privileged to open today's proceedings as a part of the Asia Disaster Management and Civil Defense Expo and Conference at S.Kom. As Indonesia National Disaster Management Authority, BNPB leads in charge in disaster mitigation, preparedness, response, recovery. But we don't do it alone. Of course, our strength lies in collaboration. With line ministry, civil society, the United Nations, international partners like USAID, BHA, this is a multi-stakeholders approach, allows us to bring together the best minds, the right resources, and the most innovative solution to serve people of Indonesia more effectively. Our responsibility to the nation is clear. We must ensure the disaster response mechanism are not only robust and efficient, but also sustainable. It's just only about facing today's challenges. It's about preparing for tomorrow's. And together we can build systems that safeguard our communities, strengthen our resilience, and sets the foundation for a safer and more secure future. One of the keys to tackling disaster management is sustainable resilience. This concept championed at the Global Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction 2022 and reaffirmed through the ASEAN Leader Declaration for Sustainable Resilience in 2023 in ASEAN Summits rests on 4 pillars, which is strengthening culture and institution, investing in science and technology, securing access to funding and technology transfer, and build resilience infrastructure. Climate adaptation, together with pillars, help build a future where our communities aren't just prepared, but truly resilient for generations. Now let me say that this is not an ordinary gathering. This is an event brings together the best and the brightest minds, leaders, innovators, and change makers, all committed to advance a shared mission. And what is that mission? To improve disaster resilience, to protect our communities, and to promote sustainable development for future generations. We are facing a new era of challenges. The world is changing, the climate is changing, disasters, both natural and man-made, are becoming more frequent, more intense, and more unpredictable. And so we have to be ready, we have to adapt, and we must innovate. Today, we gather to strengthen local supply chains, promote circular material use, and improve disaster management. This workshop focuses on diversifying and greening humanitarian supply chains, aligned with BNPB vision of building the resilience community through innovation and partnership. With natural disaster increasing, particularly in Indonesia and Southeast Asia, we must rethink how we approach disaster relief. BNPB is committed to leading efforts that meet immediate humanitarian needs while ensuring long-term sustainability. By diversifying supply chains and integrating sustainable practices, Indonesia can continue to lead the humanitarian response both regionally and globally. This workshop aligned with S.Kom mission to promote innovative solutions and foster cross-sector collaboration for advancing disaster resilience. Our discussion today will help shape that vision, exploring how humanitarian community can reduce its environmental footprints, diversify its supplier base, and support local economies. These are essential goals not only for effective disaster management, but for achieving sustainable development in the long run. But here's the big thing. Innovation doesn't happen in isolation. It happens when people diverse in background, experience, and perspective come together, united by a common purpose. And that purpose today is to rethink how we respond to disaster and humanitarian needs. To rethink how we can make our supply chains not only more efficient, but more sustainable, greener, because, my friend, resilience is not only about bouncing back after the disaster strikes. It's about building systems that are now stronger, smarter, and more sustainable from the start. ADEXCO is a perfect platform for strengthening, exchanging knowledge, and advancing solutions that will shape the future disaster management. By focusing on the greening and diversifying humanitarian supply chains, we take a key step toward building sustainable, resilient system. Collaboration is crucial. When government and the UN, NGO, and private sector and academia unite, we create partnerships that transcend borders, ensuring disaster response in both effective and sustainable. I want to extend my heartfelt gratitude to USAID, the Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance, and Economic Growth teams for co-hosting today's event with BNPB. A special thanks also to my colleagues from Ministry of Social Affairs, M.Si, as well as the United Nations and civil society actors and National Protection and Displacement Cluster for their leadership in improving emergency shelter and non-food item delivery. I also want to recognize our private sector partners who help manufacture and transport these critical relief items. Without the commitment of all of you, we couldn't tackle these challenges. Together, we're building a more resilient future, one where humanitarian response is faster, greener, and more localized. meeting community needs while aligning with the global sustainable agenda. This year, we are celebrating the commemoration of 20 years of Indian Ocean tsunami, which is also devastating impact of more than 127,000 people have been casualties, missing and killed. So reflection and for us is a way how we can really see that this workshop might give a contribution for the future when we will face the future crisis and disaster. So as we begin today for the proceedings, let us remember this, that the work we're doing here is bigger than any one of us. It's about creating a future that is safer, more secure, and more just a future that we stand together. Not just an item crisis, but a everyday work of building a better world. Thank you. I look forward for the important conversation we'll have today, and let's go to work. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jati. Our next opening remarks will come from Erin Nicholson, the USAID Indonesia Deputy Mission Director. As a quick introduction, she brings a wealth of experience from her work with USAID across Eastern Europe, Africa, and Asia. Before taking on her current role, she was the Office Director for East Asian and Pacific Affairs at USAID Washington, where she was overseeing various initiatives spanning from the Mekong region to ASEAN and the Pacific Islands. Please welcome Erin Nicholson.
All right. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera. Om Swastiastu. Namo Buddhaya. Salam Kebajikan. Good morning. Selamat pagi. I'd like to begin with an Indonesian pantun. For those of you who are coming from America, a pantun is like a limerick, and it's a kind of a poetic way of communicating our message. So in Bahasa Indonesia. So di Jakarta pakai kebaya dan baju koko, menuju Kemayoran naik kereta kencana. Senang saya ikut acara adekko, buat Indonesia siap hadapi bencana. Thank you, Deputy Minister Raditya, for the opportunity to be here today and to share a few words on our partnership in disaster response. And welcome distinguished guests, panelists. It sounds like it's going to be a very productive morning and afternoon on the topic. So this year, the United States and Indonesia are celebrating 75 years of bilateral relations between our two countries. Our cooperation on disaster preparedness and management provides an excellent opportunity and an example for how our bilateral partnership impacts development at the local level. USAID supports greening and diversifying the sources of humanitarian supplies and procuring materials near disaster sites. Humanitarian relief operations, especially in the early phases of a response, rely heavily on effective logistics, and producing relief items and transporting them over long distances consumes a considerable amount of fossil fuels. So it makes sense for all of us in the humanitarian community to look at our operations through a lens of sustainability. So today, my colleagues will discuss some of USAID's research and initiatives that are directly connected with greening and diversifying humanitarian supply chains. For now, I'd like to just mention a couple of the broader initiatives that USAID is involved in. USAID is working hard to integrate environmental sustainability into our humanitarian response efforts, and one of our top priorities is to address the effects of climate change, including building climate resilience for the world's most vulnerable. USAID's climate strategy guides our approach in reducing global greenhouse emissions, and helping our partner countries build their resilience to climate change. The climate strategy draws on USAID's strengths, such as our global presence, our long experience in many of our partner countries, and the breadth of our technical and development expertise. The core mandate of USAID's humanitarian activities includes responding to climate disasters and challenges, supporting the most vulnerable communities and individuals to withstand or recover from shocks. And this includes disaster risk reduction, climate adaptation activities, and resilience. To support these objectives, USAID is working to incorporate eco-friendly design principles into emergency shelters and structures, and this approach includes using sustainable building materials, improving waste management systems, and designing structures that are resilient to extreme weather events. One example in our initiative is to use recycled plastic in shelter-grade tarpaulins, and this will be addressed in more detail today. Another USAID priority is localization. That's why we are partnering with organizations like Global Shelter Cluster to increase locally led action to vulnerable communities to help reduce the risks and impacts of climate change. To ensure the sustainability of our programs, USAID prioritizes community engagement and capacity building, and we're working closely with those local communities to understand their needs, provide training on sustainable practices, and trust them to be good stewards of our environment. In recent years, the humanitarian community has recognized the value of the private sector as a strategic partner in humanitarian response. And so during these disasters, the private sector can deploy its supply chain management expertise, technology, and capacities to address humanitarian challenges. By coordinating with the private sector, we can reduce response times, enhance effectiveness of our relief operations, and lower operational costs, delivering humanitarian funding and ensuring the continuity of USAID programs and best practices. USAID is also working with manufacturers and suppliers in Asia to diversify the humanitarian supply chain, with one of our objectives to increase local procurement and make our assistance more efficient and effective. And my supply chain colleagues are here today to speak about this with our interested manufacturers about the specifications for these humanitarian products. USAID is committed to improving our humanitarian response by integrating environmental considerations into our policies and programs, and implementing sustainable practices, and fostering partnerships to address environmental challenges effectively. As all of us are here today, we share the same objectives: to save lives, to increase communities' resilience to climate-induced disasters, and so let's continue working together to improve disaster response and mitigation. Together, we can achieve a more lasting and sustainable humanitarian response. Thank you all for joining us here today. I look forward to a fruitful discussion and forming new partnerships to advance our shared priorities. Thank you.
Thank you, Erin. I really enjoyed your pantun, by the way. Oh, I'm sorry to call you back, but we were asked to do a photo session with Erin and Dr. Jati. Yeah. If you could please come back on the stage. Our photographer's right here. Everybody ready for pictures now? Okay, 1, 2, 3. Again. 1, 2, 3. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Yeah. either way. Yeah, yeah. All right, thank you everyone for taking pictures. Our first session is called Global Efforts and Progress on Greening Humanitarian Supplies. Our moderator will be Pa Victor Rembeth, the USAID KUAT Deputy Director and Private Sector Lead. And our guest speakers will be Pablo Torres, the USAID Supply Chain Advisor, Pa Ikbal Alexander, the USAID EXA Environment Specialist, and John Zavales, the USAID BHA Consultant, will be joining us virtually. Please come to the stage.
Okay, selamat pagi. Thank you for coming to this session. I just want to follow Ibu Erin using pantun. Ya, makan pisang ditambah kurma. Saya senang kita bisa bersama. Beli mangga bayarnya dolar, kita di sini bersama untuk belajar. Okay, we're talking about a very good discussion on our concern about humanitarian. Humanitarians is not just something about helping people, but also developing our sustainability, where we live in the same planet together. And the title is global. We're talking about greening and diversifying of humanitarian supply chains for today for this session. And I'm happy to say that. As an introduction, we all know that Indonesia is having not similar. We are the second worst country in the world. We're facing plastic problems, only second to China. And every year it's about 7.8 million tons of plastic waste in Indonesia. And we're talking about around a fifth or a fourth of that dumping into the sea, which means that every day we are talking about 100 garbage trucks, throwing the plastic waste into the sea. So we are really in the very, very alarming situations. However, we are now here, we're talking about how we are going to do and trying to see that humanitarian could really play a part in greening and diversifying of humanitarian supply chains, and we are glad to have two speakers. The first is our speaker, one of the speakers, I'm sorry to say that, not only the speakers, and later on, one of the speakers. There will be three speakers. The first is Pablo Torres. Thank you for being with us now. We are going to see this, he's going to share about the global efforts and progress on greening humanitarian supply chains from USAID. And then we're talking from another angle from Indonesia, Mas Ikbal from USAID EXA. That means he's going to share something about, do I speak English all the time or Bahasa Indonesia a bit? Yeah. Okay, yeah. He's going to share something about the Indonesian perspective, and also Joe Zavales is going to share virtually about what they have been done and then what they are going to do in trying to handle this topic of greening and diversifying of humanitarian supply chains. So all of us here who are here, if many of us working in humanitarians works, we could see something that we could at least improve how we could do, not only to help the people during the emergency response, not only trying to say something about disaster risk reductions, but we could also share our concern on the waste. So greening and diversifying is something that is our concern. Without further ado, I would like to give this time to Pablo Torres. Time is yours.
Here sitting, or do I?
You can be there or here, anywhere.
Good morning, everyone. So, how do I do the presentation? Okay, thank you. All right. So before I start, I just want to say thank you very much for the invitation. This is really a privilege to be here and speaking to all of you. I work on the Supply Chain Management Division of USAID BHA in Washington, D.C. So it's really a privilege to be invited to this event and speak a little bit about diversifying, greening supply chain initiatives globally from a donor perspective and also humanitarian partners. And before I actually jump on the presentation here, I just want to share just a little bit like of an experience that I had. Previous to my work with USAID, I used to work as well in the humanitarian sector with some NGOs in Africa, Latin America. And about 6.5 years ago, more or less, I approached like one of my senior managers, one of these organizations. I said, hey, listen, I mean, we deal so many relief supplies. We've been delivering so many things. Can we do something about the environment, like some less plastics, or just calculating the greenhouse gas emissions? And the response from the senior manager, who's been working in the humanitarian sector for almost like 40 years, his response was like, why? I mean, we're already saving the world. So why you have to really go to the effort of greening? Like, it's okay, it's already enough. We're already doing humanitarian work, we're already saving people's lives, and that's okay. And I got so frustrated. I got so frustrated, but also the fact that it motivated me to one day to start pushing the agenda of like greening supply chains, because it is needed. So why greening? Okay, and we can jump to the next one. I don't know how do I change? Okay. Why greening supply chains? Okay, and I know we have a lot of commercial from a private sector organizations here, and I know and that the most important part for you is profit. You have to make money, and that's understandable from a development of humanitarian sector, and that's completely okay. From the humanitarian sector, what we have is do no harm. Right? We cannot actually do a distribution or bring a lot of relief supplies, buy a lot of stuff, and bring it and make it not a disaster. So where we have to meet on your profit and do no harm, that is the common language. And that is where supply chain logistics, and even though we speak almost exactly the same language in terms of transportation and warehousing and procurement, that common understanding of where we have to find the solutions of diversifying, more greening options, that's the most important part. So, next slide, please. So, can you go back, please? 2 slides. Oh, there's a clicker here? Oh, thank you. So, going back? Perfect. Thank you very much. Okay. So, as I was saying, the humanitarian sector is not different from the private sector, okay? When it comes down to logistics, supply chain, okay? And these are the core, functions and characteristics of the humanitarian sector. This is, even though there are many of donors out there, many humanitarian organizations, when it comes down to supply chain logistics, this is what our core functions characteristics are. And basically it's procurement, transportation, warehousing, and coordination. And why I mention this is this, because when it comes down to our interaction with you, the private sector, in terms of procurement, we do the global tenders, we do contracting, we do quality control, which again, we have to abide by those quality controls that are non-negotiable, as well as you have to understand that every time, and this is also very interesting, every time we have an interaction with the private sector about relief supplies, the first question, and this is globally, the first questions from the private sector is always like, how many items do you need? How much do you need in terms of blankets and tarpaulins and shelter kits or something? And honestly, no one knows. No one knows how much to have in every given time to attend every single disaster globally. What we try to do as a humanitarian organizations is try to find some, let's say, magic bullet and pre-positioning somewhere around the globe that attend these type of disasters. But again, on terms of procurement, we have to abide by this type of functions. Transportation, exactly the same thing for the private sector. We have immediate response, and I actually want to be very simplistic in this one. In the humanitarian sector, there's only two types of transportations. One is disaster response, and the disaster response, when it comes down to supply chain, is by air or by road. But usually, when a disaster hits, it is by air transportation. And it comes down to non-disaster response. That means that we actually want to buy items from you, from the private sector, and want to put in our warehouse. That is where it goes by sea, by road. So it's a very slow process of replenishment. When it comes down to disaster, it goes by air. Okay? Warehousing. And this again goes to the point of no one knows exactly where to put. Should we put more in Dubai? Should we put more somewhere in Africa? No one really knows. So every time, every organization is trying to find a sweet spot organization, the amount of items to put regionally, so that it's not one single place, so it's not only one Dubai, but it's also everywhere scattered around. Common and shared stocks. Right now, the trend as well is that no one really, each organization will have my own stocks and will keep it for myself and will not share it to everyone. Majority organizations, including organizations that are sitting here today as some representatives, we share stocks. We share common stocks. That means that from the private sector, every time you produce something, we can actually share amongst us because the difference is very minimal. And the final point I want to mention is this, coordination. And this is where something is very new now. The coordination, up to 5 to 6 years ago, in terms of greening supply chain logistics, it was almost non-existent. Non-existent. So donors, humanitarian organizations rarely talk to each other and say, okay, how about we actually agree in a common standard of a tarpaulin or a blanket or so on and so forth? Very rarely. So this is now a trend that's going up. And let me tell you something, this is going up and this will move forward and will never go back. So moving on, and why is this all important? And again, why I showed this slide here, again, this is the common logistics supply chain functions. I don't want to dwell too much on this because this is just common language between private sector and in humanitarian organizations. But why is this so important? Is because, again, supply chain accounts, and it goes back to your point, Victor, I believe that greenhouse gas supply chain in humanitarian sector accounts for most of the greenhouse gas emissions. This is it. In terms of transportation, warehousing, procurement, we account the most of it. And not only USAID, BHA, but the entire humanitarian sector in general. Supply chain can account for the second disaster, which means what? Disaster happens. A lot of relief supplies come in. If all these relief supplies have plastic, and the moment it's open, what happens? It goes to the river, it goes to the ocean. So it causes a second disaster. And who created this? Supply chain. And thirdly is that greening, as I was saying, greening humanitarian sector, it's an upward trend. So the fact that if you were a supplier or a manufacturer that used to give or provide relief supplies to the humanitarian sector for a long time and really no one really asked you to hey, can we reduce the plastic packaging? This is changing. Everyone is moving to the right direction of reducing plastic packaging and greening the supply chain entirely. So again, for the private sector colleagues, this is something that you have to take into account, and more the humanitarian sector will be strict about it because you can see us as your client. So BHA will procure items from you, but at the end of the day, you have to think that your client is not me, is the beneficiary, is the person who actually is in the middle of disaster, is on suffering. So when you think of producing an item that you think this is going for BHA or this is going for United Nations, going for a Red Cross, you have to think that this item will go to someone that is in complete despair. So if you're going to do something that contains a lot of plastic and actually can be more harm to that person, think that that item actually might even going back to somewhere that's close to you. So the client might be you. So I just want to actually have that perception that the client's not me at the end of the day. The client is the person who's going to receive those items. So we are just a conduit. So let's jump into it greening the humanitarian supply chain. And when it comes down to greening supply chain, humanitarian supply chain green initiatives, this is the main categories. Item composition, packaging, emissions, and waste management. Okay, so if you come out of this presentation just think about these categories, that's already enough for me. Okay, so jumping right into item composition. Okay, and I have the picture here of a tarpaulin, but this don't think about a tarpaulin because majority of like relief items can go for blankets, hygiene kits, shelter kits, and so forth, so on and so forth. Like there's a lot of like items out there, but they all kind of like going to move with exactly the same trend, which is the inclusion of recycled content. Okay, within the raw materials and the production of the item itself will include raw recycled content. And I just want to have like a little history on this one. Up until 4 years ago, the humanitarian sector in general procured blankets, like the humanitarian blankets, completely on raw plastics, 100% raw plastics. Until we had an engagement with one of our private sector companies that provides blankets for us, and we say, hey, listen, out of curiosity, this is there's nothing here like we want to do this, but can you include recycled content in the blankets that like the quality will not be altered? And it's like, yeah, we can do it. It's a normal industry practice. Do you want to do it? It's like, yeah, why not? Then we start changing that, and now all of our blankets are 100% recycled content. And not only us, but like majority of humanitarian sector is moving to the direction. So like it just takes just a bit of initiatives and that common language between the private sector and humanitarian sector speaking the same supply chain logistics initiatives. Otherwise, it will just become like siloed and everyone does their own thing. Secondly, quality and durability cannot be compromised, and this is key. Every time you produce an item, and even if you say I can include 100% recycled content, the first response from us, will quality be compromised? And will its durability be compromised? If not, then we'll do it. But if it will, then we'll not do it. Okay? Open for new technology and private sector innovation. Again, this goes back to my point. You know your technology, and you know where innovation is going. The private sector is way advanced, more advanced than the humanitarian sector. So whatever you suggest, we'll probably analyze and we'll say, okay, let's build a partnership. Let's see what you can do. As long as, again, quality control and durability is not compromised. And transparency on upstream supply chain. And why I mentioned this, different from procuring an item with raw recycled plastics, right? Like that will come from, let's say, a company that's providing raw recycled plastics. The recycled content, sometimes, you don't know where the recycled facility is. Maybe that recycled facility employs children, employs under a labor conditions or picking, because at the end of the day, it's picking trash on the recycling facility. So as long as we have visibility of where the recycled content comes from, that's where the humanitarian sector will push for it. If you don't have visibility, the recycled initiatives will not come from it. Or the company can demonstrate that the recycled contents come from your own production, but you have to demonstrate that it comes from your own production. Okay? The other one in packaging, this is the biggest one. Elimination of single-use plastics in most of relief items. We can divide in three things: primary packaging, secondary packaging, and tertiary packaging. Primary packaging, you have to think of like primary packaging is like this book here, what it goes exactly around this book. So is the primary thing around the item that's going to be distributed, okay? Up to like 4 years ago, I'll tell you right now, like we have an item, it's called shelter toolkit, and the shelter, or even I call like the kitchen sets. Kitchen sets, you have about like 24 items within that box, and it's like, you know, forks, knives, and spoons, and plates, and everything. Up until 4 years ago, every single item had plastic packaging. Every single plate, and we're talking about like 24 to 30 items within a box. Multiply this by 800,000 kits into a distribution annually, you can imagine the amount of pollution that humanitarian sector gives only with one item. So the trend is that and we asked like, why do we have it? Why do we have plastic packaging on the kitchen side? It's like, oh, no one really asked. It's like, okay, let's just replace with paper, and it worked. So now everything is replaced with paper. So that elimination of plastic packaging, it's ongoing in every single direction on humanitarian relief. There are items that cannot be compromised, and most of these items are related to hygiene and personal hygiene. These items, they have to be plastic packaged in the primary packaging, so that is non-negotiable. And again, it goes back to the point of quality and durability, right? Secondary packaging, we'll try this. Well, secondary packaging, you have to imagine that like it has like this book, and then with this book, you have like then a box that has around like 10 books, right? And that box, instead of like having, for instance, like the carton, that for instance, even USAID used to have like every single box of every single bale that we procured was white with a beautiful USAID logo, blue and red. And we asked, how chemical destructive is that? It's like, yeah, for the plastic bales and the plastic cartons and everything, you have to bleach it in order to become white. And I was like, do we need it? No, we don't. So we eliminated the entire thing. We eliminated the entire process of actually bleaching, including the color of like USA logo. So no longer is needed. So now it's black colored with a recycled brown carton for all of our items, because it again is not needed. And the third thing I want to mention, and this is like, no one has the answer for this one, the tertiary package. So imagine this book in a box of 10 books, now within a pallet. And within the pallet, you have the stretch wrap, right? That's called the tertiary packaging. No one actually ever arrived in a solution that transforms that stretch wrap. Then again, imagine a stretch wrap, like those pallets arriving in destination that is just destroyed by disaster. That stretch wrap, once it's cut you take the boxes out. What do you do with the stretch wrap? Nothing. It goes to the trash, right? And imagine that pallet multiplied by 1,000. So you have like all the stretch wrap, and what do you do with that? Nothing. There's absolutely no usage for it. And we haven't not found yet a solution to find an alternative to secure the pallets with something that is biodegradable, ecological, or environmentally sustainable, like neutral. Because even the biodegradable stretch wrap, like when it comes down and you throw like in, let's say, under the ground, it's actually even more harmful than the raw plastic stretch wrap. Okay? Sorry, I go into much detail of this, but like this is like important to say because sometimes there are no solutions to it. Thirdly is emissions. And I was saying like supply chain accounts for like the majority of greenhouse gas emissions. Right now, and this is still in infancy. Everyone's trying to actually figure out how much emissions do I produce on my entire supply chain. And it goes to you as a manufacturers. It goes to transportation. So for all the way from the items transported from your facilities to my warehouse, and then from my warehouse to disaster response, the storing of those items in my warehouse, and as well as the end life. So all the way to the point of like that person who really needs those items, how much greenhouse gas emissions that produced. And it's like a massive task. But when that's done, you can see where the gaps are. Who produces more greenhouse emissions? You manufacturers, or is it transportation, or is it end life? So you can analyze. But right now, everyone is going that direction. Diversifying and regionalizing suppliers close to warehouse. This again goes to the point of like localization. It's not the fact that we don't want to work anymore with our existing suppliers. And that's also the reason why I'm here today. What we want, and COVID-19 taught us, is that we have to diversify our supply chains and our suppliers. We cannot just have like in one single location and just rely on it. So that's also the reason why I'm in Indonesia, because there is opportunities for business and procure with manufacturers here. Proximity, and again, this is also a point, the fact that we can produce here in Indonesia and the fact that perhaps we have a warehouse close to Indonesia does not mean that you are actually more greener. Sometimes, just because of transportation, it is actually more harmful to actually produce it here than actually bring it sometimes from Europe over to the location. So it has like this contradiction. And one thing I just want to briefly touch upon is this. IMO, and this is just, the IMO is like International Humanitarian Organization, is a UN regulatory body. And up until a year ago, the IMO instituted the fact that vessels will have to now like point out, or they have to like show what their greenhouse gas emissions are. And that vessel, let's say if you have a vessel that is old, extremely polluting, that vessel might be hired by us in order to transport the items from your location to our warehouse. So just to highlight like that we have this type of like also a preoccupation. Yeah. And lastly, waste management. And why we touch about waste management? It's just logistics. The only preoccupation you have is just basically delivering it. The problem is that in certain locations, such as like when we do distributions in islands, we noticed, for instance, the case of like in the Caribbean, is that the island has so much waste already from its own productions and everything, that if a disaster happens and the humanitarian sector just arrives with just massive amount of relief items that contains plastic, where does that waste go? Like no one knows. So one of the efforts that we're having right now globally by the humanitarian sector, we're mapping the waste management infrastructures as well as recycling centers in order to also to find out if disaster happens in a certain location and if we have like a lot of waste, where does that waste can actually go and transform to something that's more useful. The waste management and recycling center, if anyone here belongs to this type of like business here, recycling or waste management, be mindful that eventually we will actually call you into certain coordination for humanitarian logistics, because you will become part of like the whole structure of coordinating pre-disaster as well as post-disaster. And finally, it's also an opportunity right now that we're having is the creation of something out of that waste. And then again, you can, and this is again a pilot, but like the idea is this, is that there's already technology for this, but all that plastic waste can be put into a machine that will produce bricks. So the humanitarian sector is now in the pilot process of like creating something that if a massive disaster happens, that machine can be deployed to that location. We collect all the waste that's produced by the humanitarian sector and we produce bricks that we can build a school or something else, like, but is not actually going to a river or the ocean. Okay? So just going really briefly, because I will touch upon this like on my presentation this afternoon. What does the humanitarian sector actually want? And this is what we usually procure. This is like what we call the usual suspects. Is the common humanitarian relief items that not only BHA procures, the Red Cross procures, the United Nations procures, NGOs procures. This is called the non-food items. There's like the blankets, the plastic tarpaulins, kitchen sets, shelter kits, buckets, and hygiene kits, and so on and so forth. This is the mix of core relief items that you probably, if you're going to enter business with the humanitarian sector, this is what we produce. And I want to, because I will touch this more in the afternoon, is that basically, okay, yeah, but then a blanket's a blanket. How do I know what specifications that I can actually provide to you? And before I touch on the afternoon presentation about specifications, what a specifications of a tarpaulin actually is, so you know, these are public websites that you can just go and see what specifications are for kitchen sets, tarpaulins, and so on and so forth. It's there. You can just go and take a look what is required from the humanitarian sector. It's no secret. No one's really like hiding anything, because everything is shared so that everyone can produce and we can actually make something better, something greener. This is it. On time?
On time. Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, it's good to know a lot of things from Pablo, and later we will have a question and answers, but to be honest, for I myself, this is something new for me. Thank you. He is the supply chain supervisor of USAID, and then as I mentioned before in the opening, even in any given day, we are talking about Indonesia dumping about 100 garbage trucks to the sea of plastics. That means alarming. And for most of us here who works in the humanitarian sectors, we know that even in any disasters or emergency, we even do more. And that makes things even worse. And thank you for, at least the logic that Pablo helping us. We are learning. Kita belajar tadi. I started with kita belajar. We are learning together, and I'm learning a lot. Thank you so much. And of course, I would like to ask you questions, but I'll give it to the audience. But something that asking start from why. And of course, there's a pessimistic mode when you said this is going to be a second disaster. My goodness. So when we are not doing properly, we are talking about second disasters. But I'm glad that you mentioned an optimistic mode as well, because upward trend of doing greening and diversifying, and that's a good thing. And then I think the good things that you said, that the private sectors and humanitarian sectors need to work not in silo. That means something that we can work together as a private sectors and also humanitarians. Here is the common ground that we need to do to make our work more sustainable and to make more proper humanitarian works. Thank you again, and we are going to have our next speaker, Mas Ikbal. Sorry, call you Mas Ikbal, yeah? Mas Ikbal, he's going to share something like plastic sheeting with recycle constant research from USAID EXA. The time is yours, is 20 minutes, because John Zavales is going to answer questions virtually, right? It's yeah.
Terima kasih yang terhormat teman-teman BNPB, teman-teman USAID, dan Bapak Ibu sekalian. Saya dan tim M.Si melakukan riset ini lebih dari 2 tahun, jadi cukup lama, dan merupakan studi yang sangat komprehensif karena selain melibatkan multiple stakeholder dari pemerintah, ada expert, ada asosiasi, ada pabrik, sampai pemulung dan bank sampah pun kami interview. Tapi selain itu juga adalah data collection-nya melibatkan FGD, ada observasi langsung ke pabrik, dan juga ada testing di lab. Jadi sangat komprehensif, sehingga hari ini sebenarnya sudah kami tunggu-tunggu dari setahun lalu, dan kami yakin hasil dari studi ini dapat merevolusi humanitarian supply chain supaya lebih hijau. Next. Oh ini Pak ya? Oh ini. Oke, background dari studi ini adalah kami dari tim M.Si ditugaskan untuk membantu BHA untuk me-assess kapasitas Indonesia dalam memproduksi terpal spesifikasi dari BHA dengan konten daur ulang. Nah, di sini kami fokus bukan hanya untuk kapasitas, tapi juga melihat dari segi teknologinya, dari segi regulasi, dari segi aktor-aktornya siapa aja, dan yang paling penting mungkin dari segi waste managementnya seperti apa, bagaimana industri daur ulang bisa mensupport produksi terpal. Dan teman-teman lihat di sini, ini adalah supply chain dari plastik industri di Indonesia. Kalau teman-teman lihat di sini pada dasarnya, industri daur ulang itu memiliki 2 ciri. Pertama adalah didominasi oleh teman-teman kelas kecil dan menengah. Biasanya ada dari UMKM, dari pemulung, dari bank sampah ataupun komunitas. Yang kedua adalah Indonesia memiliki 4 juta orang atau lebih dari 4 juta orang yang berkecimpung di industri daur ulang, tapi didominasi oleh segi informal. Sehingga mengapa kalau kita bicara soal sampah di Indonesia, datanya masih sedikit abu-abu karena kita rely kepada industri yang kecil dan juga informal. Dalam 5 tahun terakhir, baik waste management ataupun recycling industri di Indonesia mengalami peningkatan yang signifikan dari segi infrastruktur, segi teknologi, segi collection rate-nya menaik, recycling rate-nya menaik. Jadi ini adalah suatu pencapaian besar dari Indonesia untuk menangani masalah sampah. Tapi melihat dari sekarang pun, recycling rate di Indonesia masih belum sempurna. Kalau di perkotaan sudah tinggi di atas 80%, tapi kalau di kabupaten dan desa masih di bawah 50%. Dan secara nasional tingkat daur ulang pun masih kurang baik, masih di bawah 20%. Tapi sebenarnya itu adalah potensi bahwa industri daur ulang memiliki potensi yang besar. Dari skema ini kita lihat bahwa sampah yang kita hasilkan sehari-hari akan diambil oleh berbagai macam pihak. Kalau di Indonesia, pihak yang paling banyak mengambil sampah adalah pemerintah, sekitar 60% sampah diangkut oleh pemerintah. Namun pemerintah biasanya masih memakai sistem yang konvensional, yaitu sistem collect, transport, dan dispose. Jadi ujung-ujungnya hanya akan dikirim ke TPA saja. Walaupun sekarang kita udah punya sesuatu seperti TPST terpadu, TPS 3R, sudah ada inisiasi untuk memilah sampah supaya masuk ke pusat daur ulang. Nah, tapi di 5 tahun terakhir ada fenomena baru, jadi kenaikan bank sampah dan juga startup daur ulang. Di 2 skema ini, sampah yang diangkut oleh bank sampah dan waste management startup encourage masyarakat untuk melakukan pemilahan sampah. Nah, jadi kunci mengapa recycling rate di Indonesia masih rendah karena masih jarang teman-teman semua di sini juga ya yang membuang sampah tanpa melakukan pemilahan. Nah, ini sudah direvolusi oleh 2 skema ini dengan bank sampah dan juga waste management startup. Di Indonesia kita punya 12.000 bank sampah dan sudah ada di setiap kabupaten dan kota di Indonesia bank sampah yang meminta masyarakat untuk memilah sampah lalu akan diberikan ke pusat daur ulang dan akhirnya ke pabrik plastik. Lalu kita juga punya waste management startup, mungkin teman-teman tahu kita punya waste for change, ada ekosistem dan lain-lain. Mereka juga melakukan edukasi sehingga angka tingkat daur ulang terdongkrak dengan banyak pemain waste management startup. Pada dasarnya industri daur ulang walaupun sudah hidup berpuluh-puluh tahun, tapi masih sangat besar potensinya dan potensinya sangat kuat untuk mensupport humanitarian supply chains. Bukan hanya dalam membuat terpal, tadi seperti Pablo juga jelaskan, mungkin untuk membuat selimut dan hal-hal lain yang dibutuhkan dalam kebencanaan. Dan yang teman-teman harus tahu juga, sampah akan selalu ada. Dan seiring dengan peningkatan perekonomian, jumlah sampah akan semakin meningkat. Dan itu adalah hal yang wajar. Jadi sampah sesuatu yang bisa kita prediksi, jadi seharusnya dengan pengelolaan yang baik, justru sampah bisa menjadi kekuatan ekonomi untuk mensupport industri-industri lain. Di tabel ini, teman-teman lihat, ini tabel tahun 2019 dari Kementerian Industri yang menjelaskan tentang kebutuhan nasional dari plastik atau biji plastik sebesar 5,6 juta ton. Plastik dibutuhkan yang paling utama adalah untuk industri FMCG, untuk kemasan makanan dan minuman, lalu industri otomotif, industri konstruksi juga membutuhkan plastik, dan terakhir ada industri terpal juga yang membutuhkan plastik. Plastik saat ini tahun 2019 didapatkan dari banyak sumber. Pertama adalah dari petrochemical industry yang mensupport, yang menyuplai plastik sebanyak 2,3 juta ton plastik. Lalu juga karena keterbatasan dari petrochemical, Indonesia mengimpor biji plastik umumnya dari Cina atau dari Middle East, dan sisanya disupport oleh teman-teman daur ulang sekitar 20%. Tapi masih ada gap di situ, sekitar 10% masih ada gap untuk menyuplai kebutuhan nasional. Oleh karena itu, di tahun 2019, mungkin sampai tahun ini, pemerintah masih membuka import sampah plastik. Ini jadi miris Pak Victor. Jadi tadi Pak Victor bilang Indonesia pensuplai sampah plastik nomor 2 atau nomor berapa, tapi kenyataannya kita masih kekurangan sampah plastik di industrinya, sehingga Indonesia masih mengimpor sampah plastik dari negara baju. Lalu kita lihat di sini, nah ini adalah industri terpal di Indonesia. Industri terpal di Indonesia masuk dalam kategori industri tenun plastik. Di industri tenun plastik ada banyak industri, ada industri karung, industri semen bag, dan industri lainnya. Industri terpal merupakan industri yang paling kecil di kategori industri tenun plastik. Di industri ini, di industri terpal, biasanya terpal memproduksi terpal kualitas rendah yang digunakan oleh transportasi untuk menutup truk atau menutup kontainer, dan juga digunakan oleh teman-teman vendor kaki lima. Jadi masih jarang terpal yang spesifik digunakan untuk humanitarian shelter. Dan selama studi 2 tahun ini kami telah mengidentifikasi setidaknya ada 13 pabrik terpal di Indonesia. Dan untuk membantu kami membuat prototipe, kami membuat matriks seperti ini untuk mensortir pabrik-pabrik mana yang mampu memproduksi terpal sesuai dengan spesifikasi dari BHA. Jadi kami membuat matriks ini dengan 2 komponen. Pertama adalah komponen pabrik mana yang memproduksi terpal dengan material HDPE. Pada dasarnya terpal bisa dibuat dengan berbagai macam plastik, ada PVC, ada PP. Jadi HDPE adalah jenis plastik yang spesifik di-mention dalam produk spesifikasi BHA. Lalu kedua adalah pabrik mana yang memproduksi terpal dengan ukuran minimal 2x6. Ini juga adalah spesifikasi dari BHA untuk memproduksi terpal dengan ukuran 4x6. Jadi setelah kami aplikasikan matriks ini, kami menghasilkan minimal 3 pabrik. Yang pertama, memproduksi terpal dengan material HDPE atau high density polyethylene, dan kedua adalah pabrik yang memproduksi minimal 2x6 meter. Pabrik terpal di Indonesia mengalami banyak hambatan, terutama pada 2 hal. Ketika COVID, penurunan jumlah order terpal, dan yang kedua adalah saat ini industri terpal di Indonesia mengalami kompetisi berat dari terpal-terpal Cina yang menawarkan produk serupa dengan harga yang lebih rendah. Jadi mengalami turbulensi. Walaupun kalau lihat dari teknologi yang kita miliki dan juga kualitas barangnya, sebenarnya bisa dapat bersaing. Dan setidaknya 3 pabrik ini diidentifikasi mampu memproduksi terpal dengan spesifikasi sesuai dari BSE. Nah, ini adalah proses produksi terpal di 3 pabrik tersebut, di mana 3 pabrik tersebut sudah melibatkan material daur ulang dalam proses produksinya dengan komposisi yang berbeda-beda. Kebanyakan pabrik menolak untuk memakai produk plastik daur ulang karena hal pertama adalah karena tidak ada demand-nya. Jadi tidak ada spesifik yang membutuhkan perusahaan yang membutuhkan terpal daur ulang. Mungkin baru tim M.Si yang datang ke pabrik tersebut yang langsung spesifik bertanya apakah ada terpal daur ulang. Nah, kedua adalah tantangan dari pabrik ketika mereka mau memakai plastik daur ulang, mereka bingung dengan supply chain-nya. Jadi nyarinya di mana? Tidak ada harga yang fix, semuanya negosiasi. Dan terakhir yang juga cukup penting adalah ketika kita bicara produk daur ulang, kita bicara soal kualitas. Jadi tidak ada kualitas konsisten dari bank sampah atau dari pengepul untuk memberikan sampah plastiknya. Terkadang bersih, terkadang ada sisa minyaknya, ada sisa sabunnya. Nah, itu yang menghambat pabrik-pabrik untuk memakai konten daur ulang dalam produksi terpal. Nah, 3 perusahaan tadi di sebelumnya, yaitu PT Heseng di Mojokerto, PT SSP ada perwakilannya di sini di Sukoharjo, dan PT UKS di Bogor. Mereka sudah memakai sampah plastik atau material daur ulang dalam produksi terpalnya. Jadi sebenarnya untuk menjawab studi dari EXA, iya, Indonesia memiliki pabrik yang memiliki fasilitas membuat terpal dengan konten daur ulang. Nah, di sini yang kita akan bicarakan adalah masalah kualitasnya. Apakah terpal yang diproduksi ini sesuai dengan spesifikasi dari BSE? Nah, ketika kita dalam memproduksi terpal, ada 2 fase di mana pabrik bisa memasukkan produk daur ulangnya. Pertama, di fase pertama ketika pembuatan benang HDPE-nya, pabrik bisa memakai HDPE daur ulang, dan kedua setelah benangnya dirajut menjadi lembaran, bisa memakai LDPE daur ulang untuk mengcoating sebelum masuk ke proses cutting dan finishing. Dan dengan tim EXA yang sangat kuat bernegosiasi, akhirnya di tahun lalu tim EXA berhasil membuat prototipe ini dengan sesuai spesifikasi dari BSE. Boleh tepuk tangan dulu buat tim EXA di sini, ada Ibu Renata. Akhirnya berhasil membuat terpal daur ulang seperti ini di PT Heseng Industrial Plastik di Mojokerto, yang sekali lagi sesuai dengan produk spesifikasi dari BSE. Dan di sini saya mau meng-highlight sedikit adalah peran perempuan dalam industri daur ulang. Jadi perempuan terlibat dari industri hulu dan hilir, dari penyuluhan, pengurus bank sampah, sehingga Indonesia harus berbangga peran perempuan cukup krusial dalam pengolahan sampah dan juga industri daur ulang di Indonesia. Dan proses pembuatan terpal daur ulang, pertama kita memakai tutup botol HDPE, yaitu tutup botol dengan kategori grade A, biasanya dari botol minuman karena level kontaminasinya sangat rendah, lalu akan dicacah dan akan dibuat menjadi kain terpal seperti ini sebelum di-coating. Nah, setelah itu akan di-coating memakai LDPE daur ulang. Kategori LDPE nomor 1 adalah LDPE fleksibel, biasanya pembungkus elektronik atau pembungkus seperti sepeda yang masih bening. Ini akan menghasilkan biji plastik LDPE dengan warna bening sehingga bisa di-coating ke dalam terpal dan menghasilkan terpal yang cukup kuat. Dan ini adalah side by side antara terpal daur ulang dan terpal dari USAID. Sedikit ada perbedaan warna, ini dengan mudah bisa disesuaikan ketika pencampuran master beads atau pewarnaan. Dan ini adalah side by side dari hasil pengujian laboratorium di 3 instansi. Dari gramasinya bisa sesuai persis 190 gram, lalu ketahanan apinya, karena di Indonesia tidak ada spesifik khusus pengujian dengan yang dianjurkan oleh BSE, jadi kami menggunakan metode lain dan kami uji untuk terpal prototipe ini dan juga prototipe dari USAID BSE dan hasil yang sama. Lalu juga kekuatan tear strength dan tensile strength-nya kurang lebih sama. Jadi kurang lebih prototipe yang dihasilkan oleh tim EXA ini bisa sesuai dengan produk spesifikasi dari USAID BSA. Oke, untuk konklusinya pertama adalah industri daur ulang masih didominasi oleh teman-teman kelas kecil dan menengah, namun memiliki potensi yang sangat besar. Kapasitas daur ulang kita masih jauh dibandingkan jumlah produksinya, jadi sangat mampu untuk mensupport humanitarian supply chains. Lalu tantangan utama dalam industri daur ulang dimulai dari teman-teman semua. Ketika kalian membuang sampah, pastikan tidak membuang sampah pada tempatnya, tapi membuang sampah sesuai jenisnya dan harus dipilah. Lalu tantangan utama dari industri daur ulang adalah tidak ada demand untuk produk daur ulang. Jadi semoga di kegiatan hari ini kita menghasilkan permintaan baru agar industri daur ulang bisa berkembang lagi. Untuk next step-nya yang kami rekomendasikan adalah untuk additional research di feasibility studies, terutama tentang potensi market, lalu membahas tentang traceability, karena ketika ngomongin sampah kita bicara soal ada human trafficking, ada pekerjaan anak kecil, jadi dipastikan sumber sampahnya harus dapat diverifikasi, lalu untuk memperkuat industri daur ulang dan juga melakukan complete life cycle assessment, terutama setelah terpal ini dipakai, lalu diapain, dibuang begitu aja atau bagaimana. Dan terakhir adalah komposisi ketika membuat terpal daur ulang mau berapa banyak, mau 10%, mau 50%, itu akan mempengaruhi dari kualitas terpal daur ulang yang dibuat. Terima kasih, saya balikan ke M.Si.
Terima kasih. It's good to hear from something after 2 years of research, yeah, of doing this kind of thing, and then it's talking about capacity, technology, actors, and even the product itself. It makes us at least building up optimistic mode, which Pablo has already mentioned, and then this is a very good information for most of us. Unfortunately, many of dinas, many of the local government, they don't. I think I heard this from you. They don't really do waste management. They are only doing a waste moving or replacing from one place to another. So it's something that this research can also provide a brief policy for the local governments to do more waste management for the goodness of all. And then I'm glad that you said sampah selalu ada. Waste is always there. Waste will be always there. But then how we could do the recycles and then something like you said that it's something like I'm amazed you said that kita kekurangan sampah plastik. It's we still need more plastic waste. Yeah, that means this is plastic waste. Yeah, even start from this. Probably we need to have someone to collect this plastic waste and then doing this kind of thing. And then I don't know, but probably John Zavales can also add some things in virtually. But what we can do is that again the market price, and then the market needs to know that there is a demand for this, and this research will help us with 5 recommendations, and then we can do more, and then trying to connect with the private sectors again with the humanitarian actors. I'm not going to comment more, but since this is a very short time for Indonesia, Jakarta time, the Friday prayer will start in 12 minutes, so there will be only 8 minutes questions and answer. Anyone would like to give comments? Okay, 1, 2, 1 lady, 2. Anyone else from this side? Okay, if not, let's start from the ladies first. Ibu dulu.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
Selamat siang. Perkenalkan saya Ibu Nadelia dari Kota Depok. Kebetulan kami dari pemerintah Kota Depok datang kemari baru hari ini, kemarin-kemarin sibuk. Yang pertama saya ingin mengucapkan terima kasih karena topik yang diangkat kali ini sangat menarik. Cuma kami tidak membawa teman di samping, yaitu teman dari Dinas Lingkungan Hidup, karena isu yang diangkat ternyata adalah isu lingkungan hidup yang mana tidak hanya Depok, mungkin di seluruh Indonesia mengalami problem yang sama terkait dengan sampah. untuk Pak Pablo dan Pak Ikbal, terima kasih. Menarik sekali apa yang dibicarakan dari pertama skema yang diangkat oleh Pak Pablo terkait dengan humanity supply chains tentang sampah dari mulai proses rekrutmen pembelian sampai ke distribusi. Maaf, saya lebih memilih bahasa Indonesia karena memang saya tidak mahir menggunakan bahasa.
Nggak apa-apa, Bu.
Bahasa
Ada
Inggris.
diterjemahkan.
Iya.
Ya, lanjut.
Thank you Pak Victor, tadi kenalan sebentar. Kemudian Pak Ikbal juga tidak kalah menarik menangkap isu itu dan menyandingkannya menjadi sebuah pembicaraan yang menarik. Dari awal sampai akhir saya mengikuti, kemudian saya ingin memberikan sebuah komentar terutama tentang di tengah-tengah antara Pak Pablo dan Pak Ikbal. Ada benang merah nampaknya yang belum tersambung antara pemerhati lingkungan dengan pemerintah ini sepertinya. Karena kami sebagai pelaku di pemerintah itu dengan gencar menerapkan beberapa strategi untuk mengurangi sampah dan bagaimana untuk memproduksi sampah seperti daur ulang dan sebagainya, melibatkan banyak sekali sektor termasuk UMKM seperti yang Bapak sebutkan tadi. Malah kami memberikan apresiasi kepada pihak-pihak yang bisa menggaungkan atau mengangkat inovasi terkait dengan ini. Kalau di Depok ada sampah maggot untuk organik, tetapi yang menjadi masalah adalah sampah non-organik yaitu sampah plastik. Ada yang menarik yaitu tadi saya menarik insight dari Pak Ikbal yaitu tentang ada gap antara kebutuhan sampah plastik dan ketersediaannya yang ada. Nah ini kok bisa ya? Kok bisa? Berarti tidak ada komunikasi atau sebenarnya komunikasi udah jalan tetapi sendiri-sendiri. Kita sibuk dengan merangsang bagaimana masyarakat untuk memilah sampah, kemudian mendaur ulangnya, kemudian menjadikannya itu barang yang lebih berguna lagi, tetapi di sisi lain itu ada kekurangan sampahnya gitu. Aneh juga nih. Nah itu menjadi PR. Saya ingin bertanya atau memberikan masukan ya. Ini perlu mensinergikan antara yang ada dengan kebijakan di pemerintah setempat. Karena hal ini akan saya informasikan ke teman saya yang di lingkungan hidup. Sampah sekarang akan menjadi bencana di masa yang di waktu dekat lagi, bencana yang menjadi urusan kami seperti itu. Nah, bagaimana PR-nya mungkin akan kita bicarakan bersama nanti melalui forum ini mungkin akan lahir sebuah conclusion tambahan di conclusionnya Pak Ikbal dan Pak Pablo. Saya sih berharapnya seperti itu. Ini menarik sekali tapi waktunya
ya,
ini
baik,
ya.
Bu. Ya,
Terima kasih.
ya, nanti akan bisa di sesi sesudah makan
Siap.
siang nanti akan lebih panjang. Tapi saya diinformasikan ternyata Pak John Zavales is already online and he's going to give brief remarks. Please do Pak John if you are already online. Tunggu ya pertanyaan yang kedua. John, are you already online? There you go. Please do. A 5-minute remarks. Audio, we cannot hear anything. Yes, yes.
Today, I was scheduled conflict that unfortunately required me to be here. One of the advantages to speaking last in a panel like this is that if the previous speakers are very thorough and expert in their fields, such as Ikbal and Pablo certainly are, then there isn't too much that needs to still be said. So overall, they covered the vast majority of what we were planning to address today. Just a couple of quick additional remarks I'll make. I won't inflict any slides on the audience, because I won't get through that, but we'll just speak briefly. Within USAID's Bureau of Humanitarian Assistance, I come from our shelter and settlement team, which does, as its name implies, emergency shelter programs. Within that area, we work very closely with Pablo and his group, the supply chain management team, on humanitarian commodities, sort of commodities that Pablo outlined that are common in these disaster responses. Within those commodities, probably the most critical one for our particular sector is the plastic particles used for a variety of emergency shelter applications. You just heard from Ikbal the details of the research program. And even though I don't speak Bahasa, we know the slides well because we've used them in many audiences and previous events. So they follow along exactly what he's doing. And he covered very thoroughly the elements of that. We decided to undertake this research about 3 years ago. And it was based on discussions that our team was having with the gentleman who was then our senior humanitarian advisor in the park. We were looking at achieving sort of a number of objectives through this study. At the beginning of this panel, if you'll recall, Victor mentioned that Indonesia is unfortunately the location of a very, very wide variety of natural disasters, both in type and in size and intensity. So based on the discussions we had at the time, we decided that Indonesia would be the perfect kind of test case for this type of research. Now that we know from the project, the research project, which Ikbal presented the findings of, now that we know that the technical and industrial capacity exists in Indonesia to produce plastic sheeting, which is both up to our specifications and also includes a significant percentage of recycled content. The next step in the process is to scale up production from prototype scale that we began with last year or so to large stocks, and stockpiles that are large enough to maintain warehouses and hopefully deploy to actual future disasters. We in USAID view this work as kind of the beginning of a much larger process, a broader process, that will hopefully make our humanitarian commodities with some of the broader development priorities we have. One of the future components we see of that, for example, is to help build the plastic waste collection and aggregation capacity infrastructure. And then connect that to the next stage of manufacturers, which overall will help us achieve these complementary goals of both sustainability and localization for us. I think that's all I have to add to our very good speakers before. So,
Yeah.
terima kasih.
Thank you. Terima kasih Pak John. Terima kasih Pak John. Get back to one more comments, and then after that we are going to do the closing because of the Friday prayer. Silakan, Mas, Pak.
Good afternoon, ya. Good afternoon. My name is Dana Rangga from Jakarta. I will have to ask about
Dari lembaga apa, Mas?
Nusa Embata Mitra. Mungkin aku pakai bahasa Indonesia atau
bahasa Indonesia aja.
Bahasa Indonesia ya.
Ya.
Kita tahu bahwa nanti sebentar lagi kan kita akan melaksanakan kampanye. Bahwa dalam kampanye itu kan istilahnya ada alat peraga kampanye yang mungkin terbuat dari bahan jenis HDP atau PPE buat pasangan calonnya itu untuk kampanye ya. yang menjadi dan nanti pada akhirnya nanti akan menjadi sampah pada saat hari tenangnya. Pertanyaannya adalah bagaimana penanganannya saat pemilu itu sudah selesai? Ya, bagaimana penanganannya saat pemilu itu sudah selesai? Terima kasih.
Baik, okay, thank you. There are two comments. One from Ibu Adel from Depok. How to actually the government of Depok, ya Bu ya. Pemerintah Depok already started good things about connecting the public and private and community on doing and even appreciating the people to do more on waste management and then more on circular ekonomi sirkular maksudnya Bu ya. Yeah. And also this second question is about well, this is very Indonesian. In every political process campaign, we do lots of posters and everything in plastics and how we could reduce the hazard and the second disaster, which is of doing this. Okay, 2 minutes for each, and then including the closing statement because we are running out of time. Starting from Ikbal, and then after that Pablo.
Ya, Ibu, makasih banyak Ibu pertanyaannya. Pertama, kalau kita mau merevolusionasi waste management di Indonesia, ada 3 komponen biasanya. Pertama, regulasi, satu kan. Di Indonesia termasuk negara yang paling banyak regulasi soal sampah. Jadi kalau di ASEAN kita nomor 1 regulasinya. Jadi kita nggak butuh penambahan kebijakan. Jadi yang harus dilakukan implementasi. Kedua, masalah infrastruktur. Ini PR besar buat di Pemda untuk misalkan memberikan pengangkutan sampah yang berbeda setiap harinya. Mungkin di Jakarta pun itu masih pilot project. Tapi kan kenyataannya kan sampah masih, saya udah pilah di rumah tapi masih diangkut di truk yang sama. Kan itu jadi masalah klasik Bu ya. Tapi yang lucunya lagi kalau kita lihat di mall-mall bahkan di depan udah ada sampah terpilah, kebanyakan kita tuh hanya buang sampah di lubang manapun tanpa melihat itu. Nah itu mengarah kepada komponen ketiga setelah regulasi infrastruktur. Ketiga adalah masalah behavior. Ini adalah PR kita semua. Sekali lagi paradigma membuang sampah pada tempatnya itu salah karena kalian hanya memindahkan masalah dari rumah kalian dan ke TPA, tapi harus memilah sampah sesuai jenisnya. Dan untuk masnya ada perbedaan antara spanduk dan terpal. Terpal bahannya itu biasanya HDPE atau LDPE, kalau spanduk itu bahannya biasanya polyester. Pada umumnya semua plastik merupakan kategori daur ulang, tapi begitu didaur ulang, polimer-polimer pembentuknya akan pecah menjadi monomer. Jadi ada batas maksimum dalam mendaur ulang. Jadi 1-2 kali masih bisa didaur ulang, tapi begitu ketiga 4 kali akan ada penurunan yang signifikan. Jadi memang pada akhirnya plastik harus dibatasi karena tidak dapat didaur ulang terus-menerus. Semoga menjawab.
All right. I will touch on the first question first, more because the election thing, I probably I'll be the most suitable person to answer. But just a quick point on your first question. I think the only thing I can see is that the humanitarian sector now with we're mapping waste management and recycling structures from the regional, let's say, even government or non-governmental recycling waste management facilities to the local ones. And why are we doing this? Because we have to answer that question. If something happens in Indonesia, hopefully not, but if something happens in Indonesia that is just massive and there's a lot of humanitarian waste coming in, that mapping already answers that question. Okay, that's where we actually can bring the waste, at least for the relief supplies that are actually being distributed for disaster response. But for a procurement, for making items, let's say relief items, what we'll try to do, at least from Ikbal's study, is that at least knowing where regional or local recycling centers are located, that is something we actually can connect. But that again goes back to the coordination. It's not an easy task. It's not easy and it will not be solved in a year or something, but it can be done. And secondly, I just want to highlight one point here. I was once not here in Indonesia, but I visited one time several recycling centers. And I asked exactly that question. Are you able to cope with the massive amount of plastic waste coming from, let's say, international humanitarian sector to this island? It was an island nation. And the person looked at me and was listen, as long as it gives me money, I'm okay. I can take everything what you make. And that's okay. As long as it's profitable, it's okay. And that's what I was saying exactly on my presentation right in the beginning. We need to meet that language between the humanitarian sector and the private sector, where you make profit, but also is do no harm. So again, the coordination part, it takes time, but we'll go in that direction. And for the election, for me, it just goes back to the innovation part. If you find something that's related to paper, great. But I just want to say something like, we all thought that biodegradable options of plastic would be the keys. Like, okay, let's just make like a, you know, a home compostable version of like a pamphlet or something. But at the end of the day, if that goes to a river, it turns to microplastics that is like almost impossible to actually treat it. So.
Okay. Right, we are closing, and then we want to hear at least a statement of closing statement. And you are representing USAID on this case, and then you are representing Indonesians on your concerns of this. So please share what will be one closing statement that you would like the audience to take away and bring home and then make it as a habit, you said. Just one sentence.
Bapak Ibu jangan pernah lelah untuk mencontohkan hal baik buat keluarga dan teman-teman semuanya. Terima kasih.
Okay, thank you. Now you're speaking on behalf of USAID now.
That's a good one to top. I think for everything we're doing in terms of like humanitarian sector and including greening supply chains, just be honest. For now, if you can make it something that is greener or something that you cannot make it, just be honest. Like if it's something that we move in exactly the same direction, we're trying to actually improve this world and the humanitarian sector, humanitarian relief. If you're not being honest to say this is recycled or this is not recycled, this is green and not greener, like it will just be a hit back on us in a negative way. So again, honesty at this stage of like having this coordination for us is the most important part.
Okay, good for sentences. Okay, thank you so much. And I need to summarize in 1 minute. We are now learning that when we are talking about the second disasters, about supply chains, we need to share the concern. And what we have been doing, at least this last 1.5 hours, we're talking about market economy. We're talking about demand and supply and how we are going to balance and make it as proper as possible so that supply chains could be green and diversifying. And this is not just about issue of waste or environment, but this is on disaster risk reduction. And we are talking about all the actors, public, private, and community should be included in all this effort and share the concern. And when we are talking about this, we are talking that disaster is everyone's business, but we do still have hope. And thank you for this presentation. And we look forward to change our habits of waste management. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam tangguh. Thank you, Pablo. Thank you.
Thank you, Pa Victor, Pablo, and Pa Ikbal.
Do we need to take pictures? No, I'm kidding.
Yes. No. I was actually asked to ask you if you could stay on stage and take pictures. All three of you, please. Thank you again, Pa Victor, Pablo, and Pa Ikbal. It's almost 12 o'clock now, and I'm sure everybody is hungry, so we're going to take a break for lunch and Friday prayers. Please be back before our next session, which starts at 1:30. It's going to be about private sector landscape assessment and specification and e-marketplace, which I think will be very interesting, so please come back. Kita akan break sekarang untuk makan siang dan sholat Jumat. Yang ingin melakukan sholat Jumat, ada ruangan di lantai 4 gedung BPN. Terima kasih. Oh, GPN, gedung GPN. Terima kasih. Read a Indonesian limerick because I don't want to be stood up by Erin and Pak Victor, who also said limericks earlier. Saya akan baca pantun sekarang. Udah tahu jawabannya ya? Elang putih melesat melayang, kancil kecil dalam sangkar, jaga hutan jangan ditebang, agar jangan hingga banjir bandang. Thank you. All right, if everybody's ready for the next session, our session will be on private sector landscape assessment and specification. And our moderator will be Ibu Miranti Hussein from the Humanitarian Forum Indonesia. Our presenters will be Richard Recker from Resonance, Pablo Torres, the USAID Supply Chain Advisor, and Pak Wahyu Widayanto, the IFRC Shelter Cluster Coordinator. Please welcome them to the stage now.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everybody. Hope you are already gathering all the insights to having this discussion because this is a critical times for Indonesia since after lunch is quite. Well, first of all, thank you. Selamat siang. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Nama saya Miranti, saya dari Humanitarian Forum Indonesia, and we also would like to welcome our panels, well, all male panels. We have Bapak Pablo Torres from USAID, and also the previous speakers from the previous session, and also we have Bapak Wahyu Widayanto from IFRC and also Shelter Cluster Coordination, and welcome Bapak Richard Recker from the Resonance. Well, this session we will talk about the private sector's landscapes assessments and the specification, and without long introduction, but as the humanitarian actors, the involvement of the private sector is quite significant. It's also part of the agenda, most of our agenda, to ensuring that all the aspects of the humanitarian pace actions is also make sure that what kind of collaborations, what kind of connection between all the actors, including the private sectors. But today, we also like to specifically talking about the procurements, about the how to using the plastic sheets, and so also Mas Wahyu will talking, maybe sharing about how the shelter clusters try to figuring out how to collaborate of all the humanitarian actors in the shelter sectors. Well, for the first speakers, we please Pak Richard Brecker to share the assessment findings exactly for humanitarian supplies and private sector landscape. 20 minutes, yours floor, Pak. You can still sit or you want to use the podium?
I'll sit, if that's okay.
Thank you.
If you don't mind. Selamat siang, Ibu Bapak sekalian. My name is Richard Wecker. I'm with Resonance Global. Resonance is a global consulting firm. We work with USAID's Bureau of Humanitarian Assistance on a project called Mainstreaming Private Sector Engagement in Humanitarian Programming, or the MAPS-H project. And this was launched in 2021 to support BHA with its mission and vision to leverage private sector skills, networks, logistics, operations, and expertise in humanitarian programming. And this facility provides on-demand assistance to BHA for their various requirements. But for this assignment, actually, we were approached by the BHA's supply chain management team with Pablo and his team to conceptualize specific assignments for Southeast Asia, the region more broadly. And we're very glad to share with you some of the highlights of that story for you today. So, is this?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm just going to read to you a couple of objectives of our assignment, which is basically under a chapeau, or like under a broader regional plan of the U.S. government in the region to work on supply chains and make sure they're better to respond to shocks. And our assignment under that umbrella is really about mapping some of the current humanitarian supply chain in the region, but with a specific focus on emergency shelter and non-food items, and to better understand the relationships between the purchasing organizations like USAID or some other humanitarian organizations that buy supplies from the private sector, and the suppliers themselves, the manufacturers. The second objective was to assess the existing and potential capacity of those manufacturers to produce these items. And we took a we were taking quite a broad view initially, looking at water sanitation items initially, which can include in these wash kits quite a few items, but after a little bit of time, we narrowed that down to focus on emergency shelter, and that corresponded quite well with the work that was happening with the EXA team that they presented on this morning. And they wanted to understand, of course, whether these local manufacturers can meet specifications at the comparable volume, at the lead times and costs, but also according to social and environmental standards. So there's quite a few particular needs that the U.S. government is looking to meet here with this work. And then our final objective is to analyze the implications and make some recommendations as to like what might be some next steps. But I should say before I launch into this is that the purpose of this study is it's not to divert business from existing suppliers that BHA maintains in South Asia or in Central Asia, but it's to diversify their pool of suppliers, and also to change some of the contracting relationships where sometimes they go through intermediaries, but the objective here is to more work directly with manufacturers and in their goal of diversifying this pool of suppliers. So what's the case for supplier diversification? I think Pablo mentioned it earlier that COVID-19 hit the global economies across the world and led to a number of supply chain shocks. I think part of this is due to what's called concentration risk. That's when you have too many eggs in one basket. That's a saying they have in English. I'm not sure if they have an equivalent saying in Indonesian. I'd like to learn it. Tell me after this conversation. I'd like to hear what that is. But since then, since COVID-19, the U.S. government's been pursuing shifting strategies to looking at reducing supply chain risks. And it's looking at it in a number of different sectors, but certainly they're looking in the humanitarian sector, given that about 70 to 80% of humanitarian relief items, or 70 to 80% of relief funding, and this goes across the board, is estimated to be through procurement. So if you understand what your average humanitarian budget is, like take 70 to 80%, and that's probably going towards the procurement of relief items or for transport and logistics. And so the case is there, you know, I think it's to say that there's a significant amount of money that's going towards this, so how can you reduce find efficiencies within that? And so I think there's both an economic case, but also a social and environmental case. And that environmental case is one where we've heard this morning, where it's about like looking at increasing the amount of recycled content input to the production of relief items, but it's also looking at other aspects of the circular nature of the products. After post-consumption, what happens to the product? So is there a purpose for it afterwards? So just to give you a bit of a picture of the client that we're working with, the US government is probably the biggest humanitarian relief donor. And in terms of the sector-specific contributions that they make to the shelter or the emergency shelter and non-food items, they're also making a large contribution of about 40% of the global contribution goes towards it. So these figures are drawn from the UNOCHA's, the United Nations Office for Coordination of Relief. It's from their statistics and their tracking on some of this data. So BHA's role in the humanitarian supply chain, we were asked to look into you know, how does it work? How does this supply chain work? Well, to kind of put it into perspective, BHA has a dual role. It funds organizations, local organizations, international organizations to procure supplies. And I think that graphic on the previous slide, to point it out maybe on the right-hand side, is actually the contributions that are towards these partners. That's the financial contribution towards the implementing partners themselves. When BHA or USAID procures directly from its suppliers, that's a different pool of funding, and it's a different role. I mean, BHA has a number of warehouses around the world. I think Pablo mentioned that earlier, and some of those warehouses are located in Miami or Dubai, Djibouti, Johannesburg. And our study looks more specifically at BHA's role in this global humanitarian supply chain and considers how that links with Southeast Asia and those implications for either sourcing locally and even storing locally as well. So this image here actually is from what's called the United Nations Response Depot. It's actually in Subang, Malaysia. And it's a joint warehouse where they store resources from, you know, both the U.S. government but also other governments in the region, and have them pre-positioned as white goods, either unbranded, that can be used between organizations. But in this case, these were some branded items that were used in relief operations over the years. This was back in 2015. So I think this is just to give you a bit of a picture of some of the regional pre-positioning. Now coming to the items, once again, I think these were the key points that we were looking into, and we're continuing to look into this because this is an ongoing study. What I'm presenting to you today is really just some preliminary findings. And again, our goal is to be looking at sort of what are the product specifications and can they be met, the production volume, production standards, unit costs, and lead times. And we'll be able to assess this after we do a standardized, what we call like request for information market assessment, and then look at how suppliers or manufacturers might compare to one another based on these variables. So maybe just drawing back a step, I think this was highlighted by Ikbal's presentation earlier, that tarpaulin manufacturers in this region usually have non-humanitarian clients. And some of those uses for that tarpaulin are in construction, in agriculture, for drying or treating agricultural products. It's also for transportation generally. And I guess we're quite encouraged by seeing the results of the EGSA scoping study, because that was, I guess, giving us a key answer as to whether local manufacturers can produce to specifications. Of course, they do need to go through some final steps of just the final testing, but I think most of that has been confirmed. I think what that's also provided us with is like a baseline for our assumption. If they can do it in Indonesia, they can probably do it in other countries in Southeast Asia as well. So that's just a bit of a baseline for thinking about how we might look at other countries in the region and thinking about diversifying that supply chain. So to give you like a bird's eye overview of maybe how some of these manufacturers feed into the global supply chain, this is just a very rough schematic, and I hope you don't get lost in some of the details here, but I'll just talk you through it briefly. That from the perspective of one product from USAID's much bigger commodity catalog, looking at the product of emergency tarpaulin or plastic sheeting, most of the global suppliers to this supply chain are from Pakistan or in China, and their relationship with US government or other humanitarian donors or NGOs directly as well is through a group of intermediaries. And these intermediaries are suppliers, and I'll talk more about that in a second, but just to give you an idea that they're buying through these purchasing agents and shipping that to be stored in the regional warehouse in this region in the UNHRD in Subang. And that facility is supported by a number of different donors. In fact, it's quite heavily supported by these donors with both the commodities that they're holding, but also in terms of their operational work. They have 2 satellite warehouses in Chai Nut in Thailand, as well as in Camp Anguilado in Manila in the Philippines. And the one in the Philippines is of particular interest because that's a warehouse that it's on the shared premises with the National Disaster Management Agency, the Office of Civil Defense in the Philippines, and it enables quite a good sort of stock management process. But with this arrangement in this region, these, I guess, 3 locations actually provide some of the strategic stockpiles. If a national disaster occurs and it's beyond the carrying capacity of the national government, they will usually tap these resources in these satellite warehouses that are managed by the ASEAN's Center for Humanitarian Affairs, AHA Center. And this network of warehouses has been built over years. It's been progressively built up, and its capacity is quite impressive. But actually what's interesting is that since 2017, actually, they've started to procure locally. And so this warehouse in Malaysia, in the Philippines, has brokered long-term agreements with local manufacturers, local suppliers, to start supplying to both the Office of Civil Defense and to the ASEAN warehouse. And this presents an interesting opportunity. So what it does confirm is that local long-term agreements for local procurement exist and are prevalent in the region. And it also establishes a precedent for the potential for BHA leveraging some of these relationships and building them out further. But I guess what's sort of on those dotted lines in the bottom of this schematic is looking at sort of Indonesia, where you've got BNPB and where it's maybe resourcing, and I think probably this graphic's probably a misrepresentation because BNPB doesn't actually do a lot of the procurement of humanitarian tarpaulin. In fact, it's the Ministry of Social Affairs, as we know, Kemensos, and the many members of the local shelter cluster here, led by the Red Cross and other humanitarian implementing partners. But we know that a lot of that local procurement exists through these partners in their purchasing and storing locally and pre-positioning with BNPB or through their local NGO warehouses. So this dotted line here in this schematic is just sort of with a big question mark asking, can these manufacturers in the Philippines or Indonesia be supplying to these regional warehouses or global warehouses where they're pre-positioning their supplies. So after giving you that overall the big picture, some of the preliminary headlines that were mostly developed through a series of conversations we've had with a number of humanitarian implementing partners here in Indonesia, in the Philippines, as well as with government counterparts and some private sector entities as well, is just in the context of like where the baseline for thinking about the EGSA study this morning, thinking about the potential exists to produce these products locally. Where to next is the question. So some of these recommendations are first of all, that the local supply chain potential exists, but the global reliance remains. This tarpaulin that's produced globally has very exacting specifications. They're very particular about the types of requirements that are there, and as a result, any international non-government organization or the UN still have to purchase from these global manufacturers or through these agreements that they have, because they've gone through the steps of meeting those requirements. So until some of these local manufacturers do pass some of those tests and go through that procurement process, this will remain. There's a bit of a bottleneck, and that diversification challenge, that concentration risk persists. Number two is around challenges with scaling circular tarpaulin supply chains. And what I mean by this is, while Indonesia, it has the capability to produce tarpaulin to BHA specifications, which was confirmed, there's a lack of adequate waste collection and sorting in country. We heard this from Ikbal's presentation, that a key bottleneck is actually the feed or the input of locally collected plastics to these manufacturers without them having to buy it from out of the country, from other countries, and import it in order to produce a recycled product. So that's one key challenge of this shift. But as we heard from Pak Wahyu, he actually highlighted this when we had an interview in Jakarta not so long ago, was that another key challenge with this circular nature of the emergency tarpaulin is actually the post-consumption, the use of post-consumption shelter. And this is like when locally the responders have given out sheeting to affected people, they've used it, it's degraded, and they have no use for it anymore, so it's discarded. So who's taking care of that rubbish? That's still a persistent challenge that was highlighted by the local shelter cluster. Procurement priorities vary across actors, and we heard that local humanitarian partners often opt for what is most cost effective, and they end up opting for lower grade tarpaulin. And we're talking about grades here. The types that they described here is like A2 to A4 grade tarpaulin, which is, it's maybe a substandard. They would like to go for a higher grade. I think the grade that the BHA is looking for is like at the mid-level. But cost is a factor, and donors are generally deferential to the technical expertise of the humanitarian implementing partners, meaning that the members of the national working group that works on shelter response, they expect them to have the understanding of what's the best and what's technical and what's meeting the specification. So there's a bit of a dynamic here between the donors having an understanding about what they want to achieve with environmental sustainability and this supply chain, but also working with local partners and trying to reach an agreement between like what's a good and acceptable level of specifications. I think, as I was saying before, in that sort of bigger schematic, you see that there are some roles in this global supply chain that will shift. And one of those roles is the role of the supplier. Most of the procurement that takes place is through an intermediary supplier. And an intermediary supplier is one who is like a trader, you know. A manufacturer works through a trader to a client. And that relationship's probably going to change if the global humanitarian community starts to work more directly with manufacturers. So what does that mean for this supplier, this trader, right? There's still a role for that trader, and that trader can be fulfilling a role that they've been playing quite well over the years, which is around assembling these supplies, what we call kitting services, and it's putting these items into an appropriate packaging and making sure that that packaging meets requirements, and putting items into a box that they call like an emergency kit. So I think there's still a purpose for that between the relationship between a manufacturer and a supplier. Sorry. I might be going a bit over time, shall I? Sorry, back. Overall product specifications lack standardization. Well, I think this was to say that locally sourced tarpaulin often lacks standardized specifications around the conformity standards for the humanitarian community. So what we heard from the local partners here is that there's a lot of variation on tarpaulin in Indonesia that's used. Some of it depends on the cost. Mostly it depends on the cost and depends on what's available in the local market. But with this variation in consistency, it means that Indonesia manufacturers can't supply the global market because they haven't standardized the specifications according to the global standards. But it also means that between organizations in Indonesia, it's difficult for one organization and its stockpile to be handed over to another organization and for them to guarantee whether it meets their requirements. I think our sixth observation was that environmental and social standards, there's still low priorities in terms of like some of these organizations. We heard from Pablo before that some organizations are really pushing the grain on this, and I think obviously USAID's organization of this work with M.Si and other partners in country with doing this research is testament to that. But I think overall some of the humanitarian actors still view it as a compliance challenge and go through a box checking exercise with procurement. So this remains and was something that we heard from a lot of the local partners. But we also heard that between suppliers, manufacturers, and the humanitarian community that there's a lot of information gaps and communication issues. Manufacturers, they lack clear market signals that there's a demand for this product. You know, they need to hear it from the humanitarian community that there is a market for this, and they need to know that that market is worthwhile pursuing. You know, what's the value of that market? You know, what's the frequency of purchases? All of these details need to be communicated, and I think that's something that we'll be looking into as a next step, and a need for improved communication. And maybe we'll hear more about this from the next session when it talks more about digital tools for optimizing supply chains and getting that information out to the market so that it's accessible to all. And lastly, just to mention, there's an interesting role in this whole dynamic around the role of business associations that play a role in an untapped role in sort of disaster response coordination, particularly around conducting market assessments. So understanding whether local markets do have those products available, and if they're not available locally, where's the next point that they can be sourced from? Because not everything in these warehouses are sufficient, and certainly sourcing from local markets can be a good option, and that links very closely with cash-based programming, as we know. Okay, so in terms of next steps, and I'll wrap up after this, these are just headline observations on what might be next steps, and suggested next steps are empowering supplier diversification and local procurement is obviously the underlying objective of this initiative, but establishing some sort of guiding principles to promote supplier diversification and local sourcing is needed. And that's about enhancing resilient and sustainable procurement strategies. Standardizing product specifications, I think globally there are standard specifications, but taking steps to unify those specifications and socializing them or making awareness around this is still a persistent need. We hear from experts like Pablo that the global specifications are largely agreed upon between some of the largest humanitarian organizations, but I think locally and regionally there's still a lot of discussion, particularly among like line ministries and line ministries having maybe similar products but different specifications. I think leading the shift towards ethical sourcing is quite important, and I think that's where it comes down to finding champions for the cause, finding counterparts like BNPB or Kemensos that have the interest, the leadership, and the authority to take this step. You know, it's quite promising to hear from BNPB, you know, some of the initiatives that they take around finding more sustainable ways of procuring products and introducing products. Even at this conference, a lot of these products are heading in that direction. So I think this is all very promising. So engaging and mobilizing business networks for disaster resilience is another one. Once again, I was saying joining forces with local business networks to develop robust market, thinking more about the disruption of supply chains and how that can be averted. I think that's a key recommendation there as well that can be supported by business associations, sort of collectives of businesses. And lastly, on partnering with the private sector for strategic sourcing. This is really about like looking at collaborating with the private sector partners to strengthen supply chain management, and that comes back to sort of improving that communication and information sharing among businesses. So I'll this is it. Leaving off here with an ongoing market assessment that's underway. Part of this research and the final work of our report hinges on us drawing in business interests into understanding, you know, whether they can contribute, whether they can produce plastic sheeting to global specifications. So this RFI is open, it's live. If you are a manufacturer in the audience and you're working on humanitarian plastic sheeting, we would like you to follow this link before the deadline of the 20th of September. And this is open for the areas of Indonesia and the Philippines. But just to caveat or consideration here and note that any response to this call for request for information, it's not a direct procurement relationship. It's more just to understand whether it's possible first a procurement process, of course, maybe occurring after this. So I think that's it from my side. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak today, and be glad to answer any questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Pak Richard. It's quite interesting findings, yeah. It's a plus for Pak Richard. It's very interesting findings of the assessment, because one of the challenges that the humanitarian organization facing today in Indonesia is also how to have a strategic engagement with the private sector related to the supply chains. It's also the standards of procurement, logistics, part of the process that we need to elaborate in the near future. Thank you, Pak Richard. Next, thank you. Continuing with your previous, continuing your previous presentation, Pak Pablo, and also related with the funding of Pak Richard's assessments. Well, talking about emergency shelters, talking about emergency assistance delivery, specifically in Indonesia or in Asia for sure. It's very, very important also for how to talking about green supply chains. Part of this is also about talking about the standardized or significancy of the more of the specification of the materials. That's we need to elaborate next. So, Pablo, the floor is yours. 20 minutes. Hope you can share it. Hope you can share your.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Yeah, thank you for introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. So I can start this one. So I always like to actually start a presentation with like a little bit of a story, a real live story. And one of the things, just to go in line with like we were saying about supplier diversification. Before COVID-19, and this is like overall humanitarian sector, one of the easiest items to buy international was buckets. Buckets is like easiest item, right? It's like a bucket. Of course, you have certain specifications and lab tests and requirements to buy a bucket that we, BHA, as well as the humanitarian sector in general, always share exactly the same specifications. So prior COVID-19, to purchase a bucket or thousands of buckets from our manufacturers, and I'm talking about the moment you actually put a purchase order to the manufacturer and arrives at a warehouse in Dubai or Miami and so some other warehouse, it took about 3 months. 3 months, that's it. I'm gonna compete with that. It took about 3 months, that's it. That's how easy it was. Like manufacturers in Southeast Asia, and it arrives like all around the world. It was easy, it was fast, it was quick. Pricing was almost the same and everything. And then COVID-19 came. And COVID-19 came, and then us and all the humanitarian sector utilized exactly the same manufacturers. And what happened is that these manufacturers, well, were closing. So they were giving away all their stock that they had, as well as they could not produce more because the raw materials such as plastic and petroleum, they could not get it because also the source was closed because of COVID-19. So everyone was just stuck. And it took, for our order in the middle of COVID-19 of buckets, it took a year from the moment we put the purchase order to arrive at our warehouse. And that's where the click came, like just somehow like the knowledge of like we need to diversify manufacturers. It's not the fact that we don't want to do business with the existing manufacturer, but we need to diversify. We need to have more options. So that's the case of like having this study, because otherwise we will just be stuck on continuing exactly the same process. So that being said, I'm going to talk very, let's say, in general terms on 3 topics right now. While my first presentation was like very generalist, my presentation this afternoon is going to be very specific in terms of specifications. I will slightly touch upon like how we do procurement, just to also to understand how the humanitarian sector kind of does a procurement of items, relief items in general, but then like going much depth like about specifications. I know it may sound boring for some, but why I highlight about specifications is this. If you don't follow specifications, well, first of all, the specifications of majority of relief items, we all share the same thing. Not only BHA, but other donors, as well as the humanitarian sector in general. Even though there's slight disagreements or slight differences here and there, majority of it is almost the same. So if you are eventually going to provide relief items to BHA through this study and so on and so forth, you might actually be opening for global clients, such as the United Nations, the Red Cross, Red Crescent Movement, and so on. But then again, why we highlight specifications? Because you have to abide by the quality standards. It's non-negotiable, okay? So moving forward on procurement. So again, this is like a repetitive slide there, but like I just want to highlight this. Majority of the items that we procure and humanitarian organizations procure globally are these. The majority of disaster responses, like immediate response and immediate assistance, will follow always exactly these categories: blankets, plastic tarpaulins, kitchen sets, shelter kits, buckets, hygiene kits, and so on. So when you see events in Gaza or in Haiti or Ukraine or Turkey and so on and so forth, majority organizations will always concentrate their in-kind, their material assistance on these items. And that's where the beauty happens, because if we follow exactly the same specifications, including greening, including recycling content, then basically every time items arrive at beneficiaries and someone receives a kitchen set from BHA, from the Red Cross, from United Nations, I know that content is almost the same. So there is like no differences of but this kitchen set doesn't have nothing, or that kitchen set has more. It's almost exactly the same standard. And that's the beauty of like having standard and specifications, because also there's a quality to it. And what Richard was saying as well is that the problem that we have right now on tarpaulins is because tarpaulins, the specifications of tarpaulins, is quite strict in terms of, I will explain a little bit later, but they're strict for some reason, and there's durability. And the problem with that strictness or rigorous specifications is that some of the tarps that we find regionally or locally, they're not up to the standards. So when a disaster happens, a beneficiary might end up receiving a tarpaulin, but as a tarpaulin, it's going to last only for 6 months or for a year, and it's just completely disintegrate and become even the second disaster, having more plastics in their environment. So again, if you think of like relief items, that's kind of like, it's not like a massive group of relief items. This is the core group of relief items that majority of organizations actually procure. So if you're like a private sector organization, think of like as a business opportunity in the future, that this is kind of like what the niche of goods actually being requested. So how do we do procurement? And I'm just going to actually point out like how BHA does procurement, but think about as well, like this is more or less how the humanitarian sector does procurement. There are some variations here and there in terms of like the naming and also the sequencing, but it almost follows exactly the same thing. And I'm going to also explain why this is the process, so you also understand why specifications, once again, is so important. So the procurement for us, we do a supplier selection, and we call like long-term agreements. So we have like a solicitation, and the solicitation always involves like, you know, showing like, hey, here it is. This is the specifications for a tarpaulin. I will emphasize the tarpaulin on this explanation here, on this presentation. This is the on solicitation. We put like the specifications for tarpaulin, and the whole selection process goes on. And then with those selected, we build a long-term agreement, which we call the LTA. That's like the first step. Like, so we have a pool of suppliers that passed all the tests, and we have them. And so next time we want tarpaulins, that's why we say a solicitation, or like we call like call orders. That's like an internal solicitation, only to those pre-approved suppliers. So it's not a public event. It's just a closed event for those already manufacturers already passed all the tests, right? The third part is that the contracting. So within that internal solicitation, let's say this is the best price, or that manufacturer said, listen, I can give you the best price, but I also can give you like the exactly requirements on the greening or the recycled content, or you can come to my factory and I will show you exactly where I get the recycled content comes from. Or even if I'm purchasing 100,000 tarpaulins or 400,000 tarpaulins, how quick can you give it to me? And that's where the whole selection process within that pool of manufacturers occur. Also, it happens that because we have a pool of manufacturers, we all say, okay, last time we give to that manufacturer, next time we're gonna give this one, so we kind of rotate as well, a bit to give also some fairness to everyone. And the third part is whenever those items are procured, and the manufacturer, so, you know, it kind of finalizes its production, that's where the quality inspection occurs. Within that, sometimes it differs, sometimes the quality control happens right in the beginning, in the middle, as well as the end of the manufacturing process. And essentially, which I will show you like next, like is all the specifications. We match exactly the specifications what the manufacturer has to abide by, and then we have a third-party independent inspection company that comes to your factory and actually will see if the item that you produced is actually matches what the specifications are. And finally is the final product, right? So that's where that item that you just produced and quality inspected and everything will come to our warehouses. And that's where we position everything. Within all the stages, from the supplier selection, solicitation, as well as the quality control, that's where all specifications are always emphasized. It is 90% of the times is that the initial specifications that we share with you, and that's what majority of humanitarian organizations have, will never change. They remains exactly the same. So there's no space for a manufacturer to say like, oh yeah, but in the middle of the game I changed because my production's like, no. It remained unchanged. So you have to abide by those specifications. And why? Because quality control is non-negotiable. Okay? So this is how, in a nutshell, procurement is done. And how we get specifications is not because, and I have the tarpaulin right beside me here. This is like an actual piece of a tarpaulin that BHA procures. The specification is not out of the blue. It's not something that came up just because someone said, this is it, and white is the most beautiful color for a tarpaulin, and the logo has to be this size, and that's it. And the 4 meters by 6 meters diameter, you know what, I like that. No, everything has a reason. And a tarpaulin, and I think you will explain much better than I will, but a tarpaulin has been researched for almost like 15 years. It's been long research because this is like the item that almost every single international disaster response, this is the first item that's been shipped. And this is the item as well that we noticed as well in the field under harsh conditions, that this item stays the same for more than 15 years. Under the sun, under the rain, under smoke, under fire, it remains unchanged. So that's why NGOs, United Nations, the Red Cross movement, private sector, donors, all came along in this research community of almost like 10, 15 years to develop this final product. And so you can understand that like after all this research to find like the final product, there is no much negotiation to say like, oh yeah, but you know, when we do a procurement process, then the manufacturer will say, I can abide by all specifications minus this one. There is no such a thing, because the final product has been researched so many times that this is it, it's non-negotiable. Okay, so just so for you understand as well, like that all these products that comes like from relief items, including the greening, including the inclusion of recycled content, it takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of organizations, a lot of like research to finally come up with like, this is the number. This is the quality control that we have to buy by the tarpaulin. Because why? Because it's durable, and because the client, which is the person who is actually now suffering, will actually most benefit out of it. And not having a tarpaulin that's going to serve only for 6 months. Is a tarpaulin that's going to serve for 15 years. And I'm not saying that the person or the beneficiary will utilize a tarpaulin, this tarpaulin for 15 years. We've seen beneficiaries that after they have their house or their shelter being like fixed and everything, they continue using tarpaulin for something else. So it's not something that's going to the trash or to the river or to the ocean. It's actually reutilized and reutilized and reutilized because it does not disintegrate. So now we'll touch upon the product specification per se, and I will apologize beforehand because it will look, it's a PDF file because it's specifications anyways, but I want you to understand more or less like the structure. The structure is like this before I show you the file. And the file, and by the way, the specification file that I'll show it to you like after this slide, it's more or less almost identical to every single organization. All those resources, public resources that I showed like in the first presentation, BHA, IFRC, United Nations, that file is almost identical to every single organization because, again, it has been jointly researched. It has been jointly publicly, everything is publicly available. There's no secret to anyone. But for those who are not used to see or read a specification sheet, like as I will show, think about it like, you know, for simplification matters, on 4 structures. One is manufacturing specification. It's like, and basically that's the technical language that will show exactly what the raw material consists of, okay? That's like where you will see like on the file, like, you know, it has to go for tear strength and so on and so forth. Like this is like, you see how the product is actually made. Secondly is instruction sheet. So majority of the relief items will come from instruction. So but the beneficiary, when he receives, says like, oh, this is how you utilize. It's not like just like a piece of sheeting that will just like actually, which side should I actually, oh, sorry, thank you. Thank you very much. So the inspection sheet will show like, you know, which side should I put like against the sun? Is both sides? Is this side or the other side? So again, thank you very much. Yeah, thank you. So the instruction sheet on the specification will show exactly, and this how the manufacturer will have to manufacture the inspection sheet. Instruction sheet will also have all the guidelines how to make the instruction sheet. Thirdly is the packaging, and you will see how the packaging, how it's supposed to do like the primary packaging, secondary packaging, and tertiary packaging. Also everything included there. So the guidelines are complete. And the third, finally, is how, and you will see how the structure, it also contains on the specifications how the quality standards are measured. So again, this is how transparent the whole process is. We will show, it shows you how we will measure your product. So there's no secret, there's no like hidden agenda, like I will try to catch the manufacturer like and try to fail him. No, that's not the intention. So the specifications, once again, is about how you make the product, the instruction how to actually utilize the product, the packaging, how it's supposed to be packaged in the most green way as well, and as well as how the manufacturer will be inspected, so the quality control is non-negotiable. If you can put the next file, please. So this is what, and this is like a draft document, and I will just highlight one thing as well. Right now, this is something that we are developing, the specification sheet, which will actually be publicly available at the BHA, USAID BHA website. But also, like on my presentation in the morning, there was like some websites that contain exactly the same information. Nothing changes, exactly the same information. And there's also another effort, before I go along on this document, there is right now a group that's called the Quality, Social, and Environmental, or QSC group, that is formed by 6 organizations, humanitarian organizations. It's IFRC, IOM, UNICEF, UNHCR. I will forget the names of it, but like essentially these organizations are kind of like those ones that are kind of first developed these specifications. Like they've been researching again for almost 15 years. And what they will try to do this year for the first time is to publicly, to make a website to put all the specifications for blankets and tarpaulins and everything in one place. Because right now the problem is to find the specifications for BHA, you have to go to the BHA website. For the IFRC, you have to go to the IFRC website. And for Doctors Without Borders, you have to go to Doctors website. So to have like one website that's easy for everyone, you just go there and like you see all specifications and quality control and packaging for everyone to see, including the private sector. So again, there is no secret to it. All right? And if there's any changes to specifications to say, oh, we need more greener packaging, because innovation happens all the time. Those innovations will be, again, in one place for everyone to see. Okay? So again, this is like a common effort, and including even the private sector. If the private sector also comes up with an idea like, hey, listen, for the packaging, there's a better solution for this, and everyone agrees with it, that'll also be on the website as well. So again, it's an ongoing effort. So on a specification sheet that you see there, okay, the first part is always a general picture and a general kind of instruction. A tarpaulin is always like 4 by 6 meters. The weight of it as well has like a certain type of standards. Wide actually has to be like a reinforced tarpaulin, and so on and so forth. This is like a very general in dimension. Now, where it comes actually to the nitty-gritty, let's say, or the more specific material to it, is where I was saying. So this is the first part, is commodity specification. And I will not go through every single specification because we'll have no time to it, okay? But whenever you read it, this is how you're supposed to make your tarp, because it will show exactly what the tear strength is, UV ray, cutting resistance, and so on and so forth, okay? Again, if it is made in such a language that a manufacturer is able to actually read it and say, okay, we can understand that and we can make that. And there's always like, because of the picture, also has some kind of like guidance as well to how it was supposed to look like. The only difference between a tarpaulin that you see in the picture and you see here right beside me is a logo when it comes down to humanitarian sector procurement. If the IFRC wants to buy a tarpaulin, it will be an IFRC logo or a UNICEF logo will be there, but like the essence of a tarpaulin is exactly the same as specified on the specification sheet. And secondly, here you can see, for instance, like the wedges and everything. Here I don't have it highlighted, but I'm sorry. Here you have here including, color, flame retardant, one of the things that like about this tarpaulin is that like actually you can hold a, and this again purposely made, right? So it's flame retardant because it serves as a roofing, or it serves like to something to cover a house that has been destroyed. So within the house you have kids, you have people who smoke, and what happens like if you have like a tarpaulin that's made of plastic that is highly flammable, and some people that are smoking inside at night just leave the cigarette butt, and what happens? It will just kill everyone inside because it will just become an oven. So this tarpaulin is flame retardant. That means that like it will actually not become ignited with the presence of like direct fire all of a sudden. Okay, and again, it has compositions to it. Why is flame retardant? It has like UV ray testing. That's why it also has composition in its raw material. Why it becomes UV ray resistant. So again, these are non-negotiable. And the part as well, instruction sheet that you have there, like the subsection, instruction sheet has to also abide by certain standards. And why is that, right? Can you imagine like if every single organization, imagine like, and again, I don't want this to happen, but imagine a major disaster happens here in Indonesia, right? And you have like massive amount of organizations that will provide a lot of tarpaulins, every single one with a different instruction sheet. Can you imagine how a recipient, like a person who's sitting there on the distribution side, receiving tarpaulin, and every single one has a different like instruction sheet? It will just become a nightmare, just become confusion. So that again, that's why there are specifications for instruction sheet. It's common knowledge for everyone. Everyone has to abide by exactly the same standard. Not finally, but the third part that was mentioning about packaging, right? And the specifications, once again, it will divide about primary, secondary, and tertiary packaging. And here, for instance, you have the packaging of the rolls itself, the rolls not, but like the tarpaulin itself, how it's supposed to be folded. And then you have the packaging, how the pallet of the tarpaulin is supposed to be as well, and including the type of pallet that you use. And why is that? It's because also we found out that certain manufacturers will not utilize exactly the same pallet. So even for distribution or transportation of those pallets, or the item itself becomes complicated. Certain manufacturers prefer that the tarpaulins are caged. And cage is like the metal bars that goes along, like instead of like a wooden pallet, it's just like a steel bar that has like a lot of like it has like all the tarpaulins like stacked up. And then again, this is like okay for sea shipment, but for air shipment, it does not work. So again, why is the reason why we put specifications? Because this type of packaging, it will work for everywhere. For air, for ground, for sea. Everything has a reason. And that's why I want to repeat it again, why it's so important to follow exactly the instructions that are on specification sheet. Okay? One of the things that you find out as well is that not only on the packaging, but as well as on the commodity specifications, you will see recycled content there. You will see the recycled content instruction, how much is to be, and if you cannot make it, that is fine. But so far, and I want to highlight this as well, so far the specifications for including recycled content within the tarpaulins, within the humanitarian sector in general, it is still optional because the technology and the adoption of it is still very recent, but it will become mandatory. Right now, what we found out through this group, the Quality Social, the QSC group, through research, is that a tarpaulin cannot exceed more than 10% recycled content. So even though a manufacturer can say, yeah, I can put 100% recycled content within the tarp, the problem is that on research it has shown that like if you increase more than 10% recycled content within the tarp, the durability of it, it will just go low. It will just decrease. So instead of like having a tarpaulin that will last for 15 years under the sun, you will have a tarp that will last only 5 years. Why? Because, well, you have recycled content, but then again, it will just become waste, right? So we don't want that. So again, quality, we cannot compromise it. And here you will see every single part of the inspection sheet on this side of like the inspection sheet. You will have like here, sorry, go back here and here. on this side of like the sheet, you have like non-conformity, or we call like AQL, is like where the quality control measures are tested. So on this side of like the sheet is how you're supposed to abide by, and on the other side of the sheet is where the third party, well, the inspection company or the lab testing and everything, that's how they're supposed to test it. Every single criteria of your specification, of the specification of your tarpaulin. So that again, I go back to the transparency of things. This is how you're supposed. This is how you'll be. This is how a manufacturer will be tested for every single criteria. There's no secret to it. So you will know that a certain specification, such as UV ray, will have to go through a lab test. Okay, so there is, and I'm sorry to say this, but certain manufacturers that the humanitarian sector used and don't use anymore or anything, there is some cheating, there's some fraud, there are certain things, and I have to be very honest, that's why it goes back to the point of like, the recommendation I say like in the morning, just be honest. That's the whole thing, because by being honest and saying, I can make according to specifications, you will get the clients, you will get, you know, a global market, but also you will help the beneficiary who will receive it, right? The moment you cheat just to make more profit, or the moment you say like, okay, I will not give that specification correctly, the UV ray will just be less, eventually you'll be caught. And once you're caught, going back to like really a trusted partnership or relationship between the humanitarian sector and you is very, very, very hard. So again, I will not go back like, you know, saying exactly how each lab testing or each quality control is made, but essentially you have, just for your curiosity, the difference between a general and a special type of like inspection level is according to the batch. So if you're like procuring 100,000 tarpaulins, it will determine exactly how many of a tarpaulins that an inspection company will show up at your factory and say, I want from the 100,000 tarpaulins, I want 125 random selected tarpaulins so I can inspect it. And I will do the lab testing and so on and so forth. So it will also show like what the quantities are for even the inspection levels. So then again, it's all transparent, but it also has to abide by, okay? So this is kind of it. I really encourage everyone to look into the publicly available resources of specifications, not only tarpaulins. If you're even curious to say, you know what, I can actually produce blankets as well because my factory can produce blankets, go ahead. Take all the specifications of blankets because they're there. That's for a purpose as well. It's publicly available for everyone to do it. So, and we welcome always, again, diversification and inclusion of human manufacturers in the fold.
Thank you very much, Pablo. Thank you for the enlightenment presentation, especially for me. You translated from about specification from numbers and worksheet into human language. Let's move to the our speakers, Mas Wahyu. What can we learn from the cluster shelters in Indonesia regarding with the specification and also about the supplies? Please.
Oh ya, thank you. Terima kasih. Mungkin saya pakai bahasa Indonesia boleh? Biar bisa berpantun kayak yang tadi ya. Mungkin kita bisa ke slide. Ya, mungkin sambil perkenalan juga, saya Wahyu dari IFRC. Peran saya adalah juga sebagai shelter koordinator. Biasa shelter koordinator di sini adalah kalau yang namanya cluster shelter itu adalah satu mekanisme koordinasi yang dibentuk oleh pemerintah bersama dengan pemerintah, dikoordinasikan oleh Kementerian Sosial, tapi itu terhubung juga dengan Klaster Nasional Penanggulangan Bencana di BNPB. Jadi yang kita bicarakan biasanya di cluster shelter ini adalah tentang beberapa hal terkait dengan intervensi pada saat bencana, kesiapsiagaan juga ketika menghadapi bencana. Nah, bukan hanya Kementerian Sosial yang ada di situ saja, tetapi juga beberapa lembaga lain, ada teman-teman NGO, INGO, bahkan ada akademia juga masuk di sana. Jadi di sini adalah tempat untuk kemudian kita saling berbagi pengalaman, termasuk berbagi cara melakukan respon, pembelajaran dalam melakukan respon, evaluasi, dan banyak hal. Saya tertarik dengan yang disampaikan Mas Pablo. Saya panggil Mas aja ya karena kita ada Mas Pablo dan Mas Richard. Mas Pablo tadi menyampaikan tentang satu hal yang menarik di awal, adalah tentang do no harm. Dan ini menarik sekali. Pada setiap kejadian bencana, memang kebutuhan tentang hunian atau shelter itu hal yang paling mendesak dan biasanya banyak sekali dibutuhkan. Karena kehilangan tempat tinggal, tempat perlindungan, untuk kemudian bisa melindungi anggota keluarga setelah kejadian bencana. Jadi ini yang kemudian menjadi concern kami, kenapa kemudian teman-teman melakukan koordinasi di cluster shelter ini. Tetapi shelter tidak akan sendirian, karena tidak kemudian hanya membagikan tarpaulin tadi dan selesai, pergi, oh tentu tidak. Banyak hal yang harus dipikirkan dan itu harus terintegrasi dengan sektor yang lain. Ada tentang air minum dan penyehatan lingkungan, ada tentang dukungan psikososial, dan selanjutnya. Karena kita memahaminya seperti ini, saya ingin mengajak Bapak Ibu yang ada di sini untuk memahami dulu dari lensa yang kami pahami tentang bagaimana shelter itu. Jadi ketika bencana terjadi, banyak rumah yang rusak, banyak orang tidak bisa tinggal kembali di rumahnya karena berbahaya. Sehingga mereka harus keluar dari rumahnya dan harus ada perbaikan atau kemudian bahkan harus direlokasi misalnya. Tetapi yang kita pikirkan tentang shelter itu tidak hanya membangun rumah, tidak hanya 4 tembok dan 1 atap, bukan. Itu adalah membangun kehidupan kembali, terutama kepada keluarga-keluarga yang terdampak setelah terjadi bencana. Sehingga mereka akan mempunyai rasa aman, nyaman, dan kemudian juga merasa ada martabat di situ. Kenapa martabat saya akan jelaskan setelah ini. Dan kemudian ada proteksi, ada perlindungan. Terpal yang tadi, terima kasih Mas Pablo tadi banyak sekali spesifikasi yang disampaikan. Dan terima kasih yang membuat spesifikasi itu karena memikirkan tentang perlindungan terhadap hujan, panas. Jadi Bapak-Bapak Ibu bisa bayangkan, kalau kemudian Anda harus tinggal dengan terpal di Palu, Sulawesi Tengah, yang mataharinya mungkin 5, buka semua itu. Panasnya minta ampun. Dan saya pengen tahu siapa yang pernah menerima terpal di sini? Angkat tangan. Siapa yang pernah menerima terpal seperti tadi itu? Sekarang lagi rame bicara tentang megatrust, nggak lagi nakut-nakutin ya. Nggak lagi nakut-nakutin. Siapa tahu, semoga tidak, kita akan menerima terpal itu. Maksud saya adalah, ketika siapa tahu kita akan menerima terpal itu, kita harus tahu tentang apa yang kita buat dengan spesifikasi yang paling baik, itu yang harus kita berikan. Bukan memberikan yang paling jelek dan paling murah, tapi memberikan yang terbaik. Jadi Bapak-bapak, ibu-ibu, supplier yang ada di sini, yang tadi disampaikan Mas Pablo, do no harm. Siapa sih sebenarnya target penerima terakhir? Ya keluarga-keluarga kita lah. Mungkin saya mungkin anak saya, mungkin keponakannya ibu bapak semua yang ada di sini. Dan apakah bapak ibu siap menerima lembaran terpal seperti itu? Bapak ibu bukan tukang semua, tidak punya keahlian, engineering dan sebagainya. Makanya tadi ada yang menarik dalam yang Mas Pablo sampaikan, instruction sheet, informasi bagaimana menggunakan itu. Ternyata dapat terpal dipakai untuk sesuatu yang mungkin berbeda dan tidak kuat, sehingga tidak akan memberikan keamanan, tidak akan memberikan kenyamanan. Sekarang yang menjadi keluarga terdampak itu tidak hanya orang sehat, ada yang sakit, mohon maaf, ada juga yang lagi hamil, apalagi kalau sudah trimester ketiga misalnya, yang harus berbolak-balik begini karena perutnya sudah besar. Mereka akan perlu tempat yang nyaman. Apakah setelah bencana bisa menyediakan tempat yang nyaman? Bisa. Selama spesifikasi dan standar kita tegakkan. Jadi kami di shelter cluster sangat mendukung ini. Tentang penegakan spesifikasi dari terpal ini. Jadi ini bukan sembarang terpal, Bu, Bapak. Ini adalah terpal yang memang dipikirkan tentang spesifikasinya. Kenapa 6x4 tadi bilang, saya maunya yang 2x5. Ya enggak, karena memang 2x5 sudah terbukti enggak akan bisa digunakan pada saat kejadian bencana. Seperti itu. Nah ini, tentang martabat. Yang kami pikirkan adalah bahwa setiap keluarga mempunyai sumber daya masing-masing yang berbeda-beda. Bapak Ibu dengan keluarga disabilitas, Bapak Ibu dengan anak kecil, lansia, pasti akan mempunyai kebutuhan yang berbeda-beda. Kalau saya tanya di sini, kalau terjadi bencana di Mbak Miranti, moga-moga enggak ya. Kalau terjadi bencana, Mbak Miranti akan bawa keluarganya kemana? Bisa jadi tetap menerima terpal, enggak apa-apa, tapi dibawa ke tempat keluarganya di Bogor sana. Untuk membuat tambahan rumah di depan rumah mereka misalnya. Nah ini yang kami sampaikan, ingin saya sampaikan bahwa setelah kejadian bencana, setiap keluarga itu akan mempunyai pilihan tergantung dari sumber daya masing-masing. Salah satu pilihannya adalah dengan mendirikan yang namanya hunian darurat atau emergency shelter. Kenapa hunian darurat? Ya karena rumahnya rusak. Kenapa harus mendirikan hunian secepatnya? Ya karena sebentar lagi hujan, anak kita mau ditaruh di mana? Sebentar lagi perlu WC atau toilet, mau buang air di mana? Pernahkah Bapak harus ngantri panjang sekali untuk pergi ke toilet? Bagaimana rasanya, Bu? Nggak karuan. Jadi ini adalah pilihan-pilihan. Salah satunya adalah menerima distribusi atau menerima yang namanya bantuan kemanusiaan berupa shelter kit. Dan di dalam shelter kit salah satunya adalah terpal. Ini adalah bagian kecil tadi Mas Pablo sampaikan. Ini adalah bagian kecil. Ada banyak hal yang kemudian bisa dibantu. Jadi apakah ada kesenjangan di sini dalam setiap bencana? Saya ingin menggambarkan setelah kejadian bencana, contoh kejadian bencana gempa Palu misalnya, besar ya, besar sekali. Pernah mengalami gempa? Ada yang geleng-geleng, ada yang begini mungkin, gak apa-apa. Gempa besar sekali, rumah rusak. Kemudian ada yang ngomong, oke kita akan berikan semua rumah hunian permanen. Emangnya gampang bikin rumah permanen? Tidak. Bisa dilakukan dengan kualitas yang bagus, betul. Tetapi perlu waktu. Dan biasanya waktu tunggu keluarga-keluarga yang terdampak bencana bukan 1 hari, bukan 2 hari, bukan 3 minggu, bukan 5 minggu, tapi kadang-kadang yang sampai 2 tahun pun ada. Jadi kenapa terpal itu harus terstandar, terspesifikasi? Karena itu durability kalau nggak salah, kalau Mas Pablo juga sampaikan tadi, Yang tidak bisa ditawar adalah tentang spesifikasi dan durability. Itu sudah nggak bisa ditawar lagi itu. Karena memang akan digunakan dalam kurun waktu yang nggak tahu, gitu kan. Dan kenapa diambil terpal? Karena lebih fleksibel, lebih mudah untuk digunakan. Contoh, ada satu rumah yang rusak tapi cuma atapnya saja yang rusak. Maka terpalnya digunakan untuk sebagai atap. Akan beda dengan tenda, kayaknya oh ya saya terima tenda aja. Belum tentu. Ketika tenda itu kemudian tidak bisa menolong atau membantu keluarga untuk kemudian melangkah kepada kehidupan mereka yang lebih baik, yaitu punya rumah. Biasanya lebih sulit. Tapi dengan hal seperti ini, dengan shelter kit atau salah satunya ada terpal, bisa digunakan saat bencana dan pada saat setelah terjadi setelah tahap rehabilitasi dan rekonstruksi, maka itu bisa digunakan untuk hal yang lain. Bisa dicuci, dibersihkan, digunakan untuk atap, untuk menambah toilet di belakang, untuk kemudian digunakan bahkan untuk livelihood, untuk mata pencaharian, untuk berjualan. Kalau Bapak Ibu lihat misalnya di pecel lele itu di bawahnya ada alas misalnya. Karena terpal itu digunakan juga untuk kemudian menghindari kelembaban. Tidak hanya panas tapi lembab. Negara kita negara yang sangat bermacam-macam situasinya ya. Maksudnya panas iya, lembab iya, hujan iya, dingin iya, ada semua. Tinggal pilih mau di mana. Jadi ini ada kesenjangan, masa tunggu yang luar biasa. Sehingga teman-teman di shelter cluster itu juga masih melihat bahwa ini menjadi satu kebutuhan untuk penyediaan adanya terpal. Salah satunya ya, bukan hal yang banyak, tapi salah satunya. Tadi sudah dibicarakan plastic sheeting, kita memang punya panduannya dan ini dibuat sudah agak lama memang. Oleh ada yang dukung adalah FRC dan S.Kom pada saat itu. Dan sekali lagi, semua hal yang ada di dalam plastic sheeting ini, dalam panduan ini adalah kemudian mempunyai alasan. Kenapa sih dibuat tebalnya sekian? Oh iya, karena ini. Kenapa sih sampai kemudian Mas Ikbal tadi yang presentasi pertama, uji tarik, itu harus ada. Kenapa? Karena memang diperlukan kekuatan. Tadi Mas Ikbal juga waktu diskusi di bawah menyampaikan, Mas ini tahan loh terhadap sinar matahari. Jadi bisa melindungi dari sinar matahari. Suhu temperatur di atas ini dengan di bawah akan berbeda. Akan lebih nyaman. Bukan sangat nyaman, tapi lebih nyaman dibandingkan di luar. Ada itu Bu, Bapak Ibu. Kenapa alasan kenapa kemudian ada spesifikasi yang harus ada warna hitam dan kemudian dilaminasi di luarnya. Panduan ini adalah referensi yang kami gunakan oleh teman-teman lembaga non pemerintah. Dan ini panduan bisa ini bukan diumpetin ya, bukan kemudian disimpan dan tidak bisa diakses, bisa. Bapak Ibu yang produsen terpal bisa kemudian mengakses ini secara langsung tinggal cari di internet, di Google, mudah sekali untuk dicari. Jadi ada banyak konsideran. Nah, spesifikasi itu tahun lalu kami mencoba untuk memasukkannya ke dalam regulasi di BNPB. Dan alhamdulillah berhasil. Jadi spesifikasi yang tadi disampaikan Mas Pablo beberapa ada di bawah kalimat standar itu kami masukkan di dalam petunjuk pelaksanaan pemberian bantuan hunian sementara bagi pengungsi korban bencana. Panduan atau petunjuk ini tidak akan berlaku apapun atau tidak akan berguna kalau kemudian tidak disebarkan dan kemudian digunakan. Sebagai petunjuk pelaksanaan memang sanksinya menjadi tidak ada. Tetapi ketika merefer kembali ke tadi, do no harm, kita adalah kemudian memberikan yang terbaik kepada korban penyintas korban bencana, maka ini yang kemudian menjadi referensi dan harus dilakukan. Jadi regulasinya ada, bahkan di situ disebutkan tentang keuntungan dan atau kelebihan dari penggunaan terpal dibandingkan dengan tenda misalnya, ada di situ. Di mana bisa mencari tentang petunjuk pelaksanaan, silahkan googling saja atau di websitenya BNPB pasti ada tentang petunjuk pelaksanaan pemberian bantuan hunian sementara bagi pengungsi korban bencana nomor 3 tahun 2023. Ini kerjasama, ini kolaborasi. Dulu ada Human Initiative, ada CRS di sini, dan teman-teman HFI juga ikut terlibat dalam penyusunan panduan ini. Jadi ini kontribusi semua, banyak orang, PMI, IFRC, ada keterlibatan di sini. Ini hal yang menarik Mas Pablo untuk kemudian karena masih PR menurut saya, petunjuk ini harus juga diketahui oleh teman-teman yang kemudian mempunyai concern di logistik misalnya. Teman-teman yang mempunyai concern tadi di procurement misalnya, sehingga mereka akan merefer ini sebagai salah satu sandaran atau referensi. Ini adalah buku yang kami juga pegang, yang di dalamnya ada juga tentang penggunaan terpal, yang kami gunakan sebagai referensi di teman-teman lembaga non-pemerintah dalam melakukan respon terhadap bencana, terutama concernnya kepada hunian atau shelter. Ini hanya contoh ilustrasi saja, bahwa terpal yang tadi disampaikan itu bisa bermacam-macam bentuknya di lapangan. Dan itu sangat tergantung dari Bapak Ibu, kebutuhan Bapak Ibu. Kalau kayak di Sumatera Barat seperti di bawah itu, ya rumahnya agak tinggi, karena mereka suka yang seperti itu. Di tempat lain mungkin tidak, itu yang paling atas sebelah kiri, itu Cianjur kemarin. Seperti itu. Jadi itu sangat-sangat tergantung dari kebutuhan masing-masing. Tapi terpal ini juga tidak bisa berdiri sendiri. Terpal ini juga perlu tonggak, perlu rangka yang kuat. Dalam petunjuk tadi juga disampaikan, jangan sampai kemudian keluarga-keluarga yang terdampak bencana itu kemudian memotong pohon di sekitarnya, memotong kayu di hutan yang kemudian akan menimbulkan bencana yang berbeda atau lainnya. Ini yang kemudian kita pikirkan juga, apakah bantuan terpal ada yang terbaik? Sangat situasional. Makanya tadi di awal, berapa sih sebenarnya kebutuhan terpal di Indonesia dalam konteks kebencanaan? Ya nggak bisa dijawab, susah, sulit. Gambarannya ada bahwa ada kebutuhan. Apakah harus disiapkan? Iya, betul harus disiapkan. Kenapa? Karena kita harus cepat dalam menyediakan terpal tersebut. Ketika minggu lalu Bu saya mengontak saya untuk kemudian, boleh nggak ada perspektif dari shelter cluster? Oh ya, saya cepat-cepat kemudian menghubungi beberapa lembaga dan melakukan ya semacam mini survei saja. Beberapa pertanyaan saya sampaikan kepada teman-teman. Dan ini yang muncul. Concern tentang terpal, concern tentang penggunaan terpal pada saat kejadian bencana atau respon bencana. Yang paling kiri adalah waktu. Kapan waktu terbaik? Secepatnya. Nah ini, kalau kemudian gudangnya ada di Cina sana atau di mana tadi? Lahore sana. Ya datangnya 4 bulan berikutnya mungkin. Tapi kalau gudangnya ada di sini atau produksinya di sini mungkin akan lebih cepat dengan spesifikasi yang baik. Kecepatan ini menjadi hal yang krusial kalau dalam respon bencana. Sehingga ada beberapa lembaga yang masih menyimpan terpal-terpal tersebut di gudang mereka. Yaitu preposition stock kalau dalam tulisan ini. 5 menit? Atau 5 hari lagi? Oh 5 menit, baiklah. Preposition stock. Kemarin saya ngobrol dengan teman PMI. Teman PMI mengatakan bahwa mereka punya 6 regional warehouse. Di 6 regional warehouse paling tidak masing-masing kalau bisa 5 ribuan di masing-masing gudang. Kenapa? Karena PMI kemudian ada stated juga kalau bisa 6 jam ya Mbak Tia ya kalau nggak salah. 6 jam paling tidak harus sudah di tempat bencana. Bayangin. Kalau tidak ada itu yang dibawa secepatnya ya nggak ada guna. How to use tadi sudah, bagaimana kemudian menggunakan. Kemudian yang satu lagi sebenarnya ada negatif impact yang jadi pertanyaan di sini. Ada satu lembaga yang mempertanyakan, setelah penggunaan terpal, kemudian kadang terpalnya rusak dan muncul debu dari terpal. Pernahkah ada penelitian tentang itu? Itu kemarin ada pertanyaan. Mungkin nanti teman-teman di sini Ibu bisa menjawab juga atau mungkin ada, oh ya saya mau loh untuk melakukan penelitian tentang hal itu. Karena betul waste management atau manajemen sampah tadi itu menjadi krusial. Tadi Mas Ikbal sudah menjawab tentang hulunya, pembuatan yang dari botol tutup botol plastik. Tetapi di hilirnya bagaimana kemudian setelah menggunakan terpal lalu nggak pernah ada tuh yang ngumpulin bekas terpal. Saya belum pernah lihat ada yang kemudian mengumpulkan bekas terpal, nggak ada. Kalaupun ada digunakan untuk membuat tas tas jinjing dan sebagainya, tapi itu kuantitinya kecil sekali. Jadi belum ada yang melakukan itu. Dan saya kira kita perlu juga selain di hulu, hilirnya juga tentang recycle ini perlu dipikirkan kembali. Dan itulah yang kemudian kita memahaminya adalah shelter itu adalah proses. Sekali lagi, bantuan yang kita berikan, walaupun mungkin hanya terpal, bukan hanya terpal ya, karena memang harus dipikirkan spesifikasinya. Bantuan yang kita berikan setidaknya bisa membantu dan tidak menghalangi proses kemudian keluarga-keluarga tersebut bisa mendapatkan kehidupan yang lebih baik. Jadi shelter adalah bukan produk, tapi adalah suatu proses. Nah, untuk menutup satu hal Mbak, penting sekali ini. Kayaknya tadi ada pantun juga, jadi saya akan tutup dengan pantun. Jalan ke Tegal, bawa ke Dondong. Kalau pakai terpal, yang sesuai standar dong. Satu lagi, pergi ke Bali naik kapal, sambil banyak baca biar paham. Kalau Anda mau bagi terpal, ingat-ingat, do no harm. Makasih.
Oke, makasih Mas Wahyu. Ibu Bapak sekalian, I'm very sorry that we run out the times. And if you have questions or any comments or for more information, you can approach the speakers during the coffee breaks. Is that okay? Yeah, because there is another agenda after this. And I need a closing statement for all the speakers about exactly what we need to conscience in the future for our works. Maybe you have a statement or something?
I think I made this point when I shared in my presentation, but I think the work in Indonesia is really encouraging. The research that's going on here and the determination and the motivation and collaboration between different partners, I think that's all very encouraging. So I wish you to go further and hopefully this learning can shape the process for other countries as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pak Richard. Pak Pablo, maybe you have closing statement to this session.
I was very touched by your presentation, and it reminded me one slide that you showed. It reminded me when I first started doing my first procurement, almost like 15 years ago, with a humanitarian sector. I exactly posed the question: why are we spending so much time on just buying this? Like I remember, I think it was blankets, and like it was. That is still my mentor. That it was a guy, my boss at that time is still my mentor. He said, well, Pablo, imagine that this blanket will go for your mother. And I was like, okay. Then it became personal. And that changed completely my mindset of like striving for quality, because the next person receiving it might be my mother.
Thank you Pak Pablo. Mas Wahyu, ada statement akhir.
Iya, terima kasih Mbak Miranti. Jadi kalau dari kami di shelter cluster pastinya mendukung adanya penegakan terhadap spesifikasi dari terpal ini, dan sangat mendukung semua riset yang kemudian akan dilakukan dalam penggunaan terpal ini. Tapi barusan disampaikan betul, siapa tahu kita yang akan menerima terpal itu. Terima kasih.
Terima kasih. Well, by all of the information that we get, at least we notice that when emergency needs comes, we need to ensuring that we need procedures of supplies, and also about have knowledge about specification to ensuring a quality of materials and timely of delivery of the assistance, and hopefully it's come up with a better humanitarian assistance. I think that's the point of this session. And thank you, big applause for the speakers. Thank you, and wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Ibu Miranti, Richard, Pablo, and Pak Wahyu. We will now take a short 10-minute coffee break before we continue on to our next session. Kita persilakan para speakers untuk istirahat dan minum kopi dulu sebelum kita lanjutkan ke sesi berikutnya. Terima kasih. Hi everyone. We would like to start our next session soon. Hari ini sepertinya ada banyak pantun ya yang di-share. Mau nggak satu lagi? Oke, aku baca ya. Waktu berlari bahu-membahu, tetap lari walau memakai gaun. Titik penyelamatan harus tahu. Banyak shelter yang sudah dibangun. Terima kasih. It seems like Indonesian limericks are a theme today, so I just shared another one. All right, are we ready to move on to the next session? Okay. Our next session is on e-marketplace. This will be facilitated by Paul Siong, the USAID BHA Private Sector Engagement Team Lead, with guest speaker Dr. Robert D'Souza, the Executive Director and Chief Executive of the Logistics Institute Asia Pacific at the National University of Singapore. Please welcome Paul Siong and Dr. Robert D'Souza.
All right, yeah. Okay, is this working? Thank you. It's a real privilege to be here with all of you. I am the private sector team lead for BHA, Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance. Pretty new in this role, so actually this workshop's been kind of a great depiction for me on really what we're trying to accomplish as a bureau. And that is to really, we've been talking about this all day, but just find that convergence between private sector interest and humanitarian outcomes, and even take a step beyond that, and that is to promote market-based solutions, address the barriers and bottlenecks really for the private sector to come in, to take leadership, to be a partner with us at the table. And so that's why I'm really excited about this e-marketplace and introducing Dr. Bob to you. As we know, delays in relief supplies and material shortages can lead to some serious consequences, right? Every minute counts when it comes to a response. And also, we talked about this, but kind of understocking or overstocking of essential commodities leads to less efficiency. So this e-market platform is really this solution to this. It's a data-driven platform, improving procurement, stocking, distribution of relief supplies. The aim is to mitigate supply imbalances, enhance supply and demand, and really boost local procurement. The platform will reduce response time. It's going to lower cost, hopefully involve the whole community up front. And the vision is to roll it out here and eventually scale it all throughout ASEAN. And so, with that, just want to introduce Dr. Robert D'Souza. He's the Executive Director, CEO of the Logistics Institute of Asia Pacific at the National University of Singapore. And his university and USAID is really partnering for this initiative. So, yeah, please give Dr. Bob a hand while he comes up.
So good afternoon. Whoa, that's loud. Now I'm afraid I don't know any Indonesian, so limericks, so just nod. Yes, so Paul, I thought you were going to do the Indonesian limericks, yeah? we haven't taught you much yet. Okay, so it's a great honor to be here and possibly your last speaker before Joe. Yes, so I'm going to keep it quite short. Now, I'm going to try, because I'm not good at standing in one place, so I kind of walk around. So, Mr. Cameraman, you'll have to keep me in the box, yeah? Okay, so thank you. So what I'm going to do is introduce you to a novel idea, which is actually the e-marketplace that's been supported very actively by USAID or USAID. And so it's ongoing work, and we will have another year and a half in order to get this to fruition. The first installment of this is already in progress through a pilot study. So, whoops. Okay, so this is my agenda for you. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about why we designed the e-marketplace, and I'm so happy that the last few speakers actually talked to you about procurement, so that is a very essential part of what we do. So we are not looking at the replenishment part of procurement, we're looking at the emergency part of procurement. So now, I have to say who we are, and we are being introduced, so I'm so happy to be back in Jakarta and be back in Indonesia. We are regular visitors here, but we belong to the National University of Singapore, and a lot of our work is in the commercial space. We have been working actively in the humanitarian logistics space for now about almost 15 years. But back in 2014, our first work actually started in Indonesia when we were asked to actually locate stockpile locations. So this might sound a very straightforward process, but it turned out to be pretty arduous. So we released a lot of documents, and all our work that we do, we make sure it's disseminated very widely through our website, and it's downloadable for free. Yep. Why did we engage in this work? I've been in the supply chain area almost all my career, even before the word supply chain were actually brought to fruition. Yeah? So we took a cold, hard look at the humanitarian delivery. And we looked at it and we asked ourselves the question, why isn't the humanitarian space looking at what the commercial companies have done very, very well? Why is there a disconnect between the two? Why is there very long lead times in ordering? And why is there such a necessity for pre-positioning? Because in the commercial space, we stage, but we don't pre-position. So why was there such a difference, and what could we learn from each other? In fact, the last 3 years of the pandemic actually taught us exactly why. We face very long and uncertain lead times, and usually we end up with stocked items that are in the wrong place at the wrong time in the wrong quantities. Unfortunately, with disaster scenarios, we hope it never happens, but we know with some degree of certainty it will. We also know that how it's been reacted to, and we also know what is necessary. You heard from the last set of speakers, especially you, Pablo, and you listed out I think the 5 basic items. We are looking also at another category, and we add up all these categories. There is still a very limited set of products that are needed. So if we have a limited set of products, how can we speed up lead time, and how can we get a better match between demand and supply? Oops. So what we did, all of us actually use e-commerce. We all use e-commerce to do our very essential purchases. We expect that delivery to be very prompt and fast. So why could we not bring this idea into the humanitarian space and make it work? The answers are very simple, because in the e-commerce space, the commercial e-commerce space, we have multiple suppliers, multiple items, not always meeting standards in the commercial sector, and the ordering in a commercial sector is very small, but very many small items delivered to many, many locations at the time. Whereas what we required was a set of few items in a big quantity to be delivered to very specific locations in a very short time. So we had to reconceive the whole idea of e-commerce to bring it into the humanitarian space. Now what you see while I'm speaking is that you'll see the e-commerce platform running in the video. Our main mission was that how do we get users on this e-commerce platform? Who are the specific users? You mentioned earlier, we need on the supply end, we need a set of very qualified suppliers. And on the demand end, we need to know who are the beneficiaries, and we need to empower the beneficiaries to get what they want on time. In the middle, what we totally ignore most of the time is that there is a need for fulfillment. So the logistics service providers actually come on board and they meet the supply to demand points. So what you see here is that it reduces the need to stock any information, stock any products or stock any inventory, because we use information to drive the supply chain very efficiently. So we make this site easily accessible in most of the donor platforms. So we are talking about platforms like Kitabisa, for example, where you can see the image, and all we need to do is put a button in it that when you click it, it will actually jump to the website that you see on the top right-hand side. You pick the products. Donors, be it institutional or individual, can contribute to buy these products, and the logistics service providers can fulfill it from supply to demand. It works very well in concept, yeah, very well. Now, the situation that we face is indeed complex. Why is it complex compared to the commercial scenario? Is because we have to have a very qualified and ranked suppliers. Because we can't, like in the commercial, say you cancel the order and because they did not meet a performance target. In the humanitarian scenario, that's not an option. Okay, so what we need to do is make sure goods flow with certainty from the left to the right. And it flows to a point where these folks who are ordering the products are not necessarily the ones who select the products. The beneficiaries are not the buyers. The donors are the empowered buyers. They empower the beneficiaries to buy the goods. So in the middle of this, we have an e-commerce platform. What also makes it very complicated in the humanitarian scenario is the use of information and the presenting of information. So you'll see on the top of the screen, we have, for example, the NDMO or the BNPB, and on that brown box there, we have a regional authority, or we have what in Indonesia, you have the BPBDs. So we need to provide them information, but they are not necessarily in the flow. So there is a lot of external actors who need to access information as it's flowing from supply to the demand point, and they need this information in a very specific way and very fast. Because each of these actors require information presented to them by role. If I'm a logistician or I'm a planner, or this is something that we need to segment the information using AI and machine learning to present that information in a way that's very easily understood and empower them to act in a concerted manner. The part at the bottom is the physical fulfillment. We see that when you order items, normally in a commercial website, the items are delivered either by the platform, Tokopedia for example, or they're delivered by the supplier. In this case, we want them to be delivered on time into a specific location, irrespective of whether it's the platform or the supplier. We need that consolidated and brought to a point in a very efficient manner. So, we had to reconstruct this whole platform into a set of modules that you see running from M1 to M9, and you can see the placement of these modules within the platform. These are not visible to the platform users. They drive the platform, it's the logic. So at the top you'll see we have to create multiple spaces for multiple disasters occurring concurrently. We have to understand what is that demand situation. That means what is that needs assessment. And usually the needs assessment is done at a very macro level, so many liters of water. We have to translate that information into logistics information, SKUs, stock keeping units. We have to manage suppliers. So not all suppliers should be listed. We have to actually manage donations because it is a requirement by the regulatory authorities too, and we have to present reporting information in a very defined way based on roles. We also have to essentially integrate all kinds of logistics service providers throughout the community to come onto a platform to fulfill this, because we do not want every supplier to make a delivery, because that would actually add to congestion at the demand point or the command post, the black box that you see in the diagram. So we have to have a staging point that we need to coordinate such that these items are consolidated and put in here. Additionally, as we went on and to develop this, we also found out that we needed to first source locally before sourcing internationally. Yeah? But we needed to make all apparent, so if there's nothing locally, it could actually be activated internationally concurrently. So you can do both. Only when you click the buy button, that means that the process is complete. Now, oops. Okay. I have shown you what the system does in a very short time, and I have explained to you who is in that system. There is multiple stakeholders. Unlike in a simple e-commerce system, which is just the buyer and the seller, on this side we have the NDMO, we have the logistics service provider, we have the suppliers, we have the platform operator, we have the technology provider, we have those who are building in the IP, and we have the beneficiaries, and we have the two types of donors. So this is a very complex scenario that we have put together through workflows with our partners. Now, I've given you a very short rundown in the interest of time. In about 15 minutes, I have introduced you to what we do. If you really want to come and know more about it, please, we are hosting a launch event on the 25th, which is next week. It's the launch of the program of work, and you're very welcome to come and learn more. We will be releasing documents on this, and we'll be releasing information and standards so that those who want to join the platform have come in. We have spent an enormous amount of time in Indonesia and in other countries engaging with very large suppliers and very small suppliers to come on board, but they must be pre-qualified, because if they do not meet the supply chain, as we all know, is only as strong as its weakest link. And I think this is something that we need to take very much good care of. When we built this platform, we did not want to build it academically. We put in academic knowledge. We put in, as you mentioned, Pablo, very strong research for 10 years. That was the amount of research that we put into this. We added generative AI applications to determine where those specific pre-positioning points ought to be, because we do not believe that those pre-positioning points should be static. Those pre-positioning points should be dynamic, and they should be based on learning from past disasters. Very little of the energy has been put into learning from the past and trying to anticipate and predict the future. Because if we can do that with the tools we have today, we will have a much more efficient system that I believe very firmly will compete with the commercial space and encourage them to participate even more. With that, I take your leave and thank you very much. If you want more information on, I can't click this anymore, but oh, there we go. You clicked it for me, yeah? So thank you very much. I'm happy to answer any questions through Paul. I appreciate the really kind introduction. Thank you. And I must thank my friends in Indonesia, Zaya and Joe. They've been very instrumental in helping us. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul and Dr. Robert. Now we will have closing remarks, key points, and recommendations from Joseph Miskov. As a quick introduction while he's coming up, Joseph is the Regional Advisor for USAID Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance. Joseph has worked in disaster response, recovery, risk reduction, and preparedness for over 20 years in Latin America, Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. Welcome, Joseph Miskov.
Thank you. Selamat sore, distinguished guests, thank you. Colleagues and partners, nama saya Joe Miskov, saya dari USAID's Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance di sini di Jakarta. Sudah punya kira-kira 2 tahun di sini, tapi pernah tinggal di Aceh dan Pulau Nias dengan bencana tsunami 2005 kira-kira. Jadi bisa bicara sedikit bahasa Indonesia. Tapi that's all I'm going to do in bahasa Indonesia. So, makasih ya. So I just want to start with thank yous. Thank you to BNPB for organizing and inviting us to, or for hosting this session. Thank you for our supporting partners, the organizations that are here present. Thank you to Pablo and Paul for coming so far from our headquarters in DC to present. Thank you for all the speakers, the panelists, facilitators. Thank you. I guess I'll just pick a couple points that we heard today. We heard a lot today. I think what struck out to me, the challenges with the supply chain, Pablo mentioned kind of before and after COVID, there's always going to be issues, challenges with the supply chain. One of the things that really struck out to me is that tension between our responsibility in the immediate term to meet the needs of the people who need our support, balance with that long-term responsibility of doing those actions in a responsible way. There's always going to be tension there. We've heard about diversifying efforts in the region, market opportunities in Southeast Asia, manufacturer capacities, innovations. Bob, your last session on the e-marketplace, that's a fun one. Opens up a lot of interesting possibilities for our world. I think over the last 20, 25 years, the representation in this room of academia, private sector, government, international organizations, NGOs in the same room, this hasn't always been the case. There's been a mistrust historically between the private sector and the humanitarian sector. I think that has decreased tremendously over the last couple decades as we both realize we need each other to get any good work done. As business turns towards maybe through corporate social responsibility, getting more into the humanitarian sector, and as the humanitarian sector professionalizes in the way of business, there's more and more overlap, more and more opportunity. So I just, in closing, and I'm not going to keep everyone too long, and they gave me an hour, I'm not going to take an hour, maybe 45 minutes, Saja. I know Bruno Mars is in town. I know it's a 3-day weekend, so I'm not going to keep you too much longer. But in closing, I think it's in the best interest of everyone in the room to continue these conversations, to work on establishing the connections in this room, maintaining those connections, working and collaborate going forward. And I think it's on all of our minds. The actual recipient of our folks who are having their worst day ever. So as we come along and support people who are suffering or have lost their homes or worse, it's a privilege to work with people in this room and our colleagues to make their lives a bit better, to reduce some of their suffering. So again, thank you. I want to wish everyone a good rest of the Adexco if you're planning to stick around. If you want to start your weekend, enjoy the weekend. Enjoy the concert if you're going to see Bruno Mars. And semoga malamu menyenangkan. Makasih ya.
All right, everybody, this concludes our event for today. Thank you very much for your attendance and your participation. Thank you again to USAID and BNPB for hosting the workshop today. Terima kasih atas kehadiran dan partisipasi Bapak Ibu hari ini. Thank you.